Okay, so this episode is just a dang trifecta of terror for me. First, look at the thumbnail. That thing freaks me out. It just does. 2, the scenes in this are actually just unsettling as heck. Good luck sleeping tonight after this. And 3, this is way too reminiscent of my own childhood home and memories. This story was sent by a listener called Snaky and is titled Snaky in There. Funny enough, don't let the title fool you. Prepare for one of the absolute scariest things I've read in a long time. Real quick, if you're on YouTube, you should be listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. Go to your favorite podcast app, look for Unexplained Encounters, click follow, and enjoy. And leave a review if you can. Thank you. Now, let's begin. I grew up in a trailer park at the end of a dirt road. The pavement ended about a quarter mile before you got to us, and it was gravel the rest of the way in. There were 14 lots there, if my memory serves correctly. 2 rows of trailers with a gravel loop between them, a burn barrel behind most of them, woods on 3 sides. And not some picturesque woods you might be imagining. Think pine plantation on one side that got logged when I was 10 or so, and older hardwood bottoms on the other side that ran down to a creek and kept on going. Nobody I knew had ever walked far enough in to say what was on the other side of them. I heard a grown man say once that it goes clear to the river, but he said it like the river was the edge of the world. And when I was little, I believed him. My dad worked at some plant about 40 minutes away back then, 12-hour rotating shifts. So some months he was gone all day, some months all night. And either way, he came home pale-faced, with his boots already untied, because he couldn't wait the extra 30 seconds to get them off. He was never a big talker, but I was his whole world, and back then he was mine. He'd be dead on his feet and still sit on the steps and listen to me tell him every single thing that happened in 3rd grade that day, nodding along like he was taking mental notes. He might have been. I'm not sure. My mother I'll get to. This story isn't really about her. But the worst night of my childhood happened partly because of where she was and where she was not, so I can't just leave her completely out. For now, I'll just say she was home all day, and somehow never really home at all, if that makes any sense. My dad came back from his shift to a sink full of dishes and a little girl who had had supper that was just a bowl of cereal. For a long time, he never said anything about it. That's how he had been raised. The 2 abandoned trailers were at the far end of the loop, side by side on the last 2 lots before the woods. Everybody called them the empty ones. Scary, huh? Nobody could tell you why they were empty, though. My dad said the man who owned the park lived a couple of towns away, and he just couldn't be bothered to haul them off. An older kid named Dustin, who was 13 and therefore an authority on everything, said one family had skipped out in the night owing rent, and the other trailer had belonged to an old man who died with no family to come and get his stuff. No idea if either of those things was true, even in the slightest. When you're a kid in a place like that, the history of everything around you is whatever the nearest older kid or adult would tell you. What I know for a fact is that both of them were unlocked, or close enough to unlocked. The brown one with the fake wood grain siding had a back door that didn't latch at all. The white one had a front door that locked, but the back bedroom window had no screen, and the pane would just slide up if you lifted it, but you had to push at the same time. Every kid in the park over the age of 6 knew it. We snuck in. It felt like sneaking back then, but nobody cared. Adults watched us go in and out of those trailers for years. The most anybody ever said was Miss Carla. She was hollering that we better not come crying to her when we stepped on a rusty old nail. Tetanus was about the only thing the adults worried about in there. Inside was about what you'd expect. The brown one still had furniture in it, a couch gone black with mildew, a dresser with drawers that stuck, and it smelled like wet carpet and mice, and in the summer it got so hot in there your ears would ring. The white one was mostly empty by then, bare rooms and ugly gold carpet. and it had the good closet. A bedroom closet with sliding doors, and one of the doors had come off its track, just leaning on the frame now, and that left a gap you could see out of. Every kid in the park had hidden in that closet at some point. It was the best hiding spot, the best one within 100 yards, and we all used it anyway. Half the fun of hide-and-seek is getting found somewhere everybody knows to look. I've been playing Mecha Chameleon lately, and it's sort of the same thing. Anyway, I know memory can get foggy and not right sometimes, but not these, not what I'm about to share with you. Old memories can make things sound scarier or seem scarier than they really were. But I can tell you straight up that those trailers were not something that scared us. Why would we go in them all the time if they scared us? No, to us kids, they were like our very own clubhouses. I remember multiple occasions of eating stolen honey buns on that mildewed couch. My friend Beth taught me to cartwheel in the White One's living room. I can still see Saturday morning light coming through those bare windows, dust floating in. 4 or 5 of us sprawled on that gold carpet, arguing over the rules to a game we'd made up 10 minutes before. That's what it was like, 99 times out of 100. This story, though, is about the 100. I'm saying this because there's a reason we were comfortable going in there after dark. To us, it would have been like getting scared of your own bedroom. The other thing I need to tell you was that there was something in those woods. We had our very own boogeyman, and for much of the time there, it felt like nothing more than just a boogeyman. The adults treated it about like they treated the creek flooding every spring. A shrug, a joke sometimes, a couple of quiet habits they might have had, but they would deny it had anything to do with it. Like double-checking the lock on a door or window after dark. The big one was the Donovan place. The Donovans ran cattle a couple miles down the road. Every so often, over years, not months, something would get after their cows. The number I heard as a kid was 3 or 4 times. I heard it from adults who heard it from other adults, so take that for whatever it's worth. I know for sure, though, that one of those times happened when I was 7, because I remember the school bus going past the Donovan place every morning, and for a week every kid on that bus was mashed up against the right side windows staring at that pasture. The story goes that a heifer got killed and partially, and this is the part the adults would drop their voices for, partially ate. Country speak for eaten. The thing didn't even bother to drag it away to do it. It killed it right there in the pasture and fed on it, then left when it was nice and full. People said it was coyotes. Other people pointed out that coyotes will take a calf but not a full-grown heifer. Then people said it had to be a black bear, and that mostly stuck, since a bear was the only animal anybody could name that was big enough to do that. The problem with the bear, though, was Gary Ray. Gary Ray Donovan was the rancher himself, one of those leathery old men who looks 80 for 30 straight years. Everybody knew him. Everybody liked him. He wasn't the town drunk. He wasn't the guy who saw UFOs. He was an honest, kind, and hard man, someone you could really trust. Well, Gary Ray had told enough people that it got around that a couple years before the heifer, he'd gone out with a flashlight late one night because the cows were going crazy and had bunched themselves up by the fence. Cows don't do that for no reason. Out past them at the tree line, his light caught something big and dark that he took for a man at first. It was standing up on 2 legs. Then it moved, and he said it was the weirdest way he'd ever seen something move before. It was too big to move like that, he said. The funny part was he described it as, word for word, hairy all over like an old sofa. Whatever it was getting after his cows. That was how he put it. That makes me think it wasn't just attacking them or hunting them. Getting after them, to me, sounds like a dog in a garden. He fired a shot in the air and it went into the trees on 2 legs the whole way. And he stood out there with his cows crowding up by him. He always made a point of that part. Cows crowding up toward a man, as if this little guy was going to protect all of them. Till his son came out to see about the shot. Here's the part I find more convincing now than I did as a kid. Gary Ray never dressed it up. He never said it was Bigfoot. And if somebody else said it, He'd wave his hand like he was waving off a fly. He saw something big and hairy on two legs after his cows in the middle of the night. That was the whole story, because those were the facts to him. Then he would change the subject, looking a bit annoyed, like bringing it back up to debate about it was an insult. People who make things up add a little more every time they tell a story, and Gary Ray hated that, so he never added one more word. People joked about it, sure. As I said, around us it was just the boogeyman. Or Gary Ray's monkey, some said. Guys would rib each other about it. Somebody's dog barks all night and the booger man must have come to check his mail. Everybody laughs, yada yada. And yet, those very same men would not hunt the hardwood bottoms east of our park, even though everyone agreed it was lush with deer in there. They drove 20 extra minutes to lease land across the highway instead. Nobody ever put those two things together out loud in front of me. But when I was 9 or so, I asked Mr. Prentice, who kept beagles and hunted everything that moved, why nobody ever hunted the bottoms. He told me a funny phrase that I never forgot. He said, "Oh, it's snaky in there." Then he went right back to his dogs. So that's how it was. Everybody joked about it, but nobody went in those particular woods. Around the park itself, it was small stuff. Every bit of it had a boring explanation handy, which is why nobody ever had to deal with it. Trash cans might be found knocked over and gone through, always on the east row, the row closest to the bottoms. Raccoons, it had to be. Except I don't think a raccoon would carry a tied garbage bag almost 100 yards into the tree line and open it there. One day in the fall, we found 3 bags back in all the trees like that, opened up careful-like. One of the grown-ups looked at them and said, dogs drug 'em off. And everybody agreed real quick. The subject was dropped fast. Then there was Curtis. Curtis was one of us, a year older than me. And one evening late in the summer, he came off the creek trail running so hard he nearly fell on the ground twice. He was white as a ghost, bawling his eyes out. He was telling everybody something had been chasing him. Within a few days, it became part of the park legends, the night the booger man chased Curtis. But I was there about a minute after he came off the trail. What Curtis actually said that first night, hiccuping through it, was different. And honestly, it was worse. He'd heard something big move in the brush off the trail, real close, so he stopped. But when he did, it stopped. But then he heard it sniffing. He did the sniffing sound for us, and I'll never forget that either. A big, slow, deep pull of air, like when you stick your whole face in a pillow and breathe in. That was no raccoon sound. It did that, then breathed another one. But then the brush moved, like it had taken a step towards him, and that's when he ran. When I heard the story up front, it didn't sound like anything ran after him. And now that he had calmed down to tell the story, Curtis wasn't saying it had chased him anymore. He instead said he just ran, in case it was. Something had been standing off the trail in the dark, smelling him. Then it started to come towards him. That's why I think it's creepier than being chased. If something chases you, at least it has already made up its mind. But this thing sounded like it was deciding about him. I've got to tell you about Biscuit now. I saved Biscuit for last in these little stories, because Biscuit is the one the adults work the hardest to explain away for us kids. Even though I was 8 when I first heard it, I could tell they were trying to spin a yarn. So Biscuit was a dog that belonged to the Breens. He was a big yellow mutt, mostly lab, and really he was the whole park's dog. He slept under different trailers depending on whatever mood he was in, walking kids to the bus stop. In March of the year all this happened, well, Biscuit turned up dead, where the backyards on the east row run into the tree line. Mr. Breen wouldn't let the kids near, but Dustin got close enough before he was run off. His report to all of us never changed. Not then and not since. There was not a mark on that dog, he said, except for one. A single gash on the side of the neck, 4 or 5 inches long. It wasn't a dog fight, or a coyote fight with a dog. A canine fight like that will shred ears and legs. It leaves a dog looking like he's been torn up real good. This was one slice, one spot. Biscuit otherwise looked like he was asleep in the weeds. Nope. The trailer park dog had been assassinated. I know that sounds funny, but the point I'm trying to make was that this dog was very quickly slashed and dead, killed in the blink of an eye. No fight necessary. Now, the adults said rebar had done it. To be fair, there was junk hanging off the trailers and along the tree line, too. An old fence, rusted out truck bed, angle iron. Gotta be rebar somewhere in there, too. The story was that Biscuit caught his neck on something running and just bled out, the poor boy. And Mr. Breen buried him behind his trailer, sitting a rock on the spot. Maybe it was rebar. I love dogs, but like people, dogs do die in stupid ways. Lord knows there was enough rusty metal along there to do it. But I've got 2 problems with that. First, no one ever found said rebar. Those men would have pulled that piece of metal out of the ground the same day, so it didn't kill the next dog or hell, a kid. But nobody did. I don't think anybody wanted to go looking and not find it. Second, about a week later, I heard Mr. Breen talking to my dad at the bonfire. They didn't know I was on the other side of the trailer, close enough to hear them. Mr. Breen, real quiet, said, "There wasn't hardly any blood." My dad didn't reply, and after a while they talked about the plant they worked at. There wasn't hardly any blood. A dog does not bleed out from a neck wound, but leave the weeds clean. I know that now. That's the moment I point to when I say the adults knew more than they let on. Not for certain, sometimes just instinctually. Like how you know a stove is hot and you don't have to touch it to figure it out, unless you're a dingus. But yeah, the adults knew something was up, and they kept on making jokes about it, but the bedtimes stayed where they were and the trash cans stayed where they were, because what were we all going to do? Us people who had to live in a trailer park. Up and move? Not on plant wages we weren't. With the rent paid up? Nah, you live with it. That's what people like us did with everything. We lived with it. Now that the stage is set, let me get to my part. In April of the year when I turned 8, a storm came through on a Sunday night. People called it a tornado after, and there was a real tornado touching down in the town that night. But I think what hit us was the edge of it. Straight line winds and hail. It made it sound like the trailer was going through a wood chipper. Scared me real good. All 3 of us sat in the hallway. That was our tornado spot. My dad had his back against one wall, and his boots were braced on the other. I was practically inside his jacket. My mom was sitting a little apart with her arms around her knees, and the whole trailer was moving. Wind like that reminds you a trailer is just a tin can that someone set on blocks, and you're in it. We came through mostly fine. We lost some skirting and the TV antenna. The real damage, though, was the bathroom. Hail and a limb punched through the roof at the back corner. Water got into the wall and under the floor, and inside a couple of weeks the subfloor in there, which was particle board like everything else in a trailer, went soft and swollen, and it started to stink. My dad tore into it one Saturday. He patched the roof fast, but when he pulled the vinyl up, the rot went wider than he'd hoped, so he did what you're supposed to do and cut it back to solid wood so it could dry out and get rebuilt right. But that left us with a hole in our bathroom floor. Not a gap, a big hole, 2 feet by 3, next to the tub. When you looked down into it, you were looking at the underside of the trailer, the crawl space. We could see dirt and pink insulation hanging down, black plastic too. Daylight never reached that spot, even at noon, so looking down there you just saw a dark rectangle next to the bathtub with cool air and a dirt smell coming up out of it. It stayed that way for about a month, but let me defend my dad here. I know how it sounds letting something like that stay like that for so long. In someone else's story, this is where the dad turns out to be a lazy drunk. Mine was nothing like that. The plant was running turnaround that month, which means overtime. Overtime you can't turn down. The floor had to dry out anyway. Plywood cost money. The joists needed sistering, and he was going to do it right or not at all. He was one guy doing everything for 3 people and bankrolling it. He'd come home from 12-hour shifts, eat standing up, look in that hole, and go to bed. It did get fixed in the end, better than the floor around it. It just took a month. Nothing sinister about that, but for that month, we lived with a hole in the bathroom. The stopgag was a blanket, an old brown moving blanket folded once and laid over the hole. We used chunks of a broken concrete block on the corners to hold it down. Officially, it was to keep the bugs from coming up, and it did that fine. In the daytime, I never thought about that blanket at all, which was exactly what my dad wanted. But nighttime was a different beast. 8 years old is that age where you've officially quit believing in monsters and haven't actually quit at all. The bathroom was past my room at the end of the trailer, and I'd lie in bed needing to pee, but wondering if it was a good idea. Here's the thing, and nobody had bothered to hide it from me. The storm had peeled a whole section of skirting loose on the east side and no one fixed it. Skirting is just for looks, after all, which meant the crawl space under our home was basically outdoors. Anything that wanted to be under our trailer could be under our trailer. Cats were under there all the time. You could hear them. And between whatever was under there and the inside of our bathroom, there was one folded moving blanket with concrete at the corners. I asked my dad one time, trying to sound casual, if an animal could get in through there. And he said, "Oh, nothing under there but stray cats. And can't none of them lift concrete," which was a good answer to give a kid. But years later it hit me that his answer only covered cats. So I had a routine. Go fast, turn the light on, eyes on the blanket the whole time. Not that I expected anything. More like how you keep an eye on a strange dog. I did check that blanket in the middle of the night, probably 15 times over during those weeks, and it was always exactly as my dad left it. Squared up, concrete at the corners. Normal for that month. The night this happened, my dad was on nights, gone at 5 and back after 6 a.m. So bedtime was my mom's job, and my mom that spring was drinking. Some nights she was funny and loud and made cinnamon toast at 9 p.m. Some nights, though, she was on the phone behind her bedroom door for hours. Then there was nights where she was just gone. Home, but sitting in front of the TV, not even watching it. Answering you a few seconds late, like your words had traveled through Jell-O to get to her. That night was a phone night, and I put myself to bed, which was normal for me. It didn't strike me as sad, just a regular Tuesday. I woke up at some point way into the night. The trailer was dark, and the TV was off, so it was late. I had to pee, and I laid there deciding if I was brave enough to do it. Eventually, I got up. The hallway light switch was outside the bathroom, and I always hit it first, so the light went ahead of me. But I began to notice something was wrong. First, my parents' bedroom door down at the other end was standing open, and was dark inside. If that door was open, it meant my mother would be in the living room, and the living room had been dark and quiet when I passed it. Mom was not in her room, and she wasn't on the couch. So my assumption had to be, right, that she was in the bathroom. I would go to the bathroom and I would knock on the door. The second wrong thing was that the bathroom door was wide open too, and the bathroom was dark. The third wrong thing I saw from the hall, and the little light spilling out of the hallway, was the blanket. It was not over the hole anymore. It had been pushed or pulled, I'll never know which, off to one side, dragged into a pile against the bottom of the tub. 2 of the concrete chunks shoved along with it, one gone down into the hole. So that hole was open. That dark rectangle was just sitting there, open into the underneath of my house. Cool air was coming up out of it. I could feel it on my shins from there. cool air, and that dirt smell. I had no reason to scream or run then. If you were ever a kid in a house where the adults had moods, you would get it. This could be just some random thing my mom did. Could be completely accidental. I didn't know. My first move in any weird situation was to find my mother and see what kind of night she was having before I made any more noise. Because on a bad night, noise made everything worse. So I stood dead still in that hallway and began to listen. There were footsteps. They were down at the far end, in the living room, maybe the kitchen. Let me try to describe them. You can hear everything through a trailer floor, and everybody living in a trailer has their own sound. My dad was heavy and even. Boom, 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 never tried to soften it. My mom was quick and light, with a little click from her heels. I knew those sounds like I knew their voices. What I was hearing was neither of theirs, and it was not the sound of a person walking. It was the sound of weight getting set down. One foot put down slow and eased into, the floor creaking long and low under it. Then a pause, a real pause of 2 or 3 seconds, then the next one. Something very heavy was moving through the dark end of my house at about a quarter of walking speed, being as quiet as they could be, and it couldn't be because it was too heavy for our old floor. My brain put it together in one cold little sentence. Somebody's being sneaky. Not somebody walking around in the dark. Someone trying not to be heard by me. I called out, "Mom?" The footsteps stopped. Not like they were pausing, they'd been pausing all along, but the trailer went quiet, like a held breath. I stood there waiting for my mother's voice to reply. Here's the thing about my mother. She always answered, instantly, and usually irritated. What? Go back to bed. She could not hear her name in that trailer and not make a sound back. That wasn't her. No sound came back. It was just quiet, and the longer it was quiet, the worse I felt, because I could feel that the silence was not empty. Somebody was down there in the dark, holding very, very still, all because I had said something. Whoever was in my house had heard me call for my mom and decided to hold still. I'll be honest about what I thought it was, because it wasn't a monster to me. Standing in a lit hallway, a monster wasn't even on that list. What I thought was that a man had gotten in through that hole, and I was standing in the light where he could very clearly see me and I couldn't see him. That was true. I was lit up. The far end of the trailer was pitch black. It hit me plain as day that it only worked in one direction. Anything in that dark was seeing me perfectly fine. With that thought, I turned off the hall light. When I've shared this story, people ask me why I did that. In the moment, it felt like the smartest thing I'd ever done. He couldn't see me if I was in the dark too. Then right away it felt like the stupidest, because now the whole trailer was black, and immediately the footsteps started again. Faster now, still careful, still setting the weight down, but the pauses were shorter, and there was no question about the direction they were coming from. It was coming from the dark of the trailer towards me. Underneath my fear, my brain kept handing me these little horrible details I never asked for, until one caught in my head. Those steps were too far apart. Our hallway floor had its spots, a creak by the closet, a soft spot outside my parents' door, a squeak at the heater vent, and other things like that. Everybody hit those spots at a certain rate, walking down it. This thing was hitting them wrong. It went from the closet creak to the vent squeak in a single step. My dad, who is 6'1", took 2 entire steps to cover that. Every day of my life, 2 steps. Whatever was coming up my hallway in the dark was covering it in strides nobody in the house had ever taken, and it was only 15 feet away from me. I did the only smart thing I could do. Get out of that hallway. My bedroom door was 2 feet to my left. I went through it quietly. Bare feet, 60 pounds, the floor didn't make a sound under me. I turned the little button lock, which clicked so loud it hurt my ears, and I stood in the middle of my dark room facing the door. My bed was right there. I could jump in it, but I didn't do that. Bed meant blankets, and blankets meant not hearing. Everything in me wanted to hear. The footsteps came up the rest of the hall and stopped in front of my door. There was a gap under that door, an inch or more, and the hall was black. So was my room, so nothing showed under it. But what came from underneath it was a sound, a sniff at the gap under my door, and it was soft, the softest sound in this whole story. A long, slow pull of air, a pause, then another one, and it moved along the gap, doing that. I could hear it travel, left to right, along the bottom of my door. It was Curtis's sound. I didn't think about that right then, but then I thought of it years later, and when I did, I got chills all over. That big, slow pillow breath. Something taking its time learning what I smelled like, and it was nice and slow about it. Whatever was on the other side of that door had to outweigh me by a few 100 pounds, but it came up my hallway in strides no man takes, stopped at my door, and gently sniffed at the gap under my door. I don't remember breathing. The sniffing went on for 10 seconds. Could have been a year, I couldn't tell. Then it stopped, and the quiet came back. Eventually I heard it turn around, going back down my hallway, and it had mostly quit trying to be quiet then. The floor creaked the whole way down, and you could hear it plainly. 2 long feet. It walked away like a big man, 1 foot after the other, and down at the end there was a heavy, soft shift. I could feel it through the floor, like something big lowering itself down. Then concrete scraping on wood from the direction of the bathroom. Then the underneath of the trailer thumped twice, off toward the east side, going away. Then true and final silence. One more thing, though. As it was walking away, the furnace kicked on, and the pilot light in the hall heater puts out a faint glow. Barely anything, but for half a second at the far end of the hall, there was that little bit of orange, and I saw something cross in front of it. Twice. One side, then the other. 2 legs going away. That's what I could see from the gap. I stood in the middle of my room until I heard birds singing. I mean that literally. At some point, I sat down on the floor with my back to the bed, still facing the door, and I was still sitting there when light came through my window, and I heard the first cardinal starting up in the pines. Only then did I get into bed, and I went out like a light. I woke up to shouting. A kid raised in a certain kind of house can tell from under a blanket how bad a fight is. This was a bad one. My dad was home now, boots still on, which meant he had walked straight into something the second he came through the door, and the words coming through the wall were the same ones I'd been hearing all year, all at once. In the car, all night, anything could have happened to her. My mother's voice climbed and cracked and turned it back around on him, which is what she always did. Here's what I pieced together, some of it that morning and some of it over the years. Your parents don't just sit you down at some point and tell you about every little fight they had. My mother had not been in the house that night. Sometime after I went to bed, she went out to the car in the driveway and passed out in it. Whether she was drinking out there because that was her spot away from me, or she had meant to drive somewhere and never got the car started, I don't know. My dad got home at 6:40 and found his wife passed out in the front seat and his 8-year-old daughter alone in the trailer. You can probably gather the rest. I never told them what I heard. Put yourself in my shoes. Their fight, that was now shaking my walls, was about me being left alone. I had just woke up from my own bed with my door still locked, and already just hours later, that night had started turning into something that couldn't have happened. I went and looked, and the blanket was over the hole, squared up, concrete at the corners. It looked so exactly normal that I started doubting my own memory while I stood there staring at it. Maybe I dreamed the whole thing. And what was I supposed to do? Walk into the middle of their worst fight, announcing that something had been in the house, sniffing at my door, walking on 2 legs? I knew exactly what that would turn into. A scared little girl has a nightmare because her mama left her all alone at night. It would have been just one more thing for them to throw at each other. So I kept it all to myself. I'll tell you 2 things I noticed. The blanket that morning was squared up, but the fold was backwards. The frayed edge was toward the tub instead of the wall. My dad laid that blanket down the same way every single time. He's a man of habit. Somebody had put it back, though, and put it back only almost right. Second, 2 days later, my dad went under the trailer to check the pipes, and he came out looking strange, and that very same weekend he fixed the floor. Turnaround or no turnaround, plywood money or no plywood money, but done that weekend. And while he was at it, he screwed every panel of the loose skirting back onto the frame, all the way around the trailer, after it had hung loose for a month without bothering anybody. I asked him what was under there. He said, "Cats," then put a couple of screws in his mouth and went back to work. The year went on. Summer came and it was normal. My mother got better for a while, which is part of her pattern too. She'll get better temporarily. Little by little, I let that night turn into something that just maybe happened. A kid can move on with just maybe. I did. The trash cans got hit a couple times in August. Eastro, like always. The Booger Man joke went around like always, and I laughed at it. By fall, we had that early stretch of southern winter that isn't really winter. It was the best weather of the whole year. Not quite cold, just cool, but the bugs are finally gone or dead, and the air was clear. Kids go feral in that kind of weather. At that time of year, it was dark by 5:30, and that was a good thing for us, because the best game we had was hide and seek in the dark. This is when the second thing happened, and this time I would not be alone. And thank God I wasn't. Freddy was with me. It was a Friday night in early December. Fridays in the park were loose. No school in the morning. Half the dads were on second shift, and the other half were 3 beers in. The rule for kids was to stay in earshot, and nobody ever tested what earshot actually meant. 6 of us were out that night. Me, Beth, Dustin, Curtis, a boy named Jesse, and Freddy. Freddy was the little one, 6 years old, Jesse's cousin, staying with Jesse's family that year for family reasons. He was a quiet little kid who followed the big kids around like a duckling. The unspoken rule was that somebody had to keep a hold of Freddy, and when we split up that night, Freddy's hand ended up in mine. Dustin was the seeker. Our boundaries were the usual: the park, the near yards, and the 2 empty trailers, which were always in bounds. The sun was half an hour gone, that deep blue before full dark. A sliver of moon came up behind the pines. Dustin counted to 50 at the burn barrel, and Freddy and I ran for the white trailer. We had the window trick. Boost Freddy through, climb in behind him, straight to the good closet. It was the first place Dustin would look, and Freddy was 6. Getting found fast was the best thing for everybody here. The closet was like always, one slider off its track, leaning against the frame. A 2-inch gap to see out of. Gold carpet, bare room. We slid the window shut behind us out of hiding instinct. We sat down on some shelf board somebody had left in there, Knees up, the two of us giggling and shushing each other, and we settled in. We waited a while. That was normal with 6 kids in a whole park. We could hear the game faintly out there. A shriek 2 lots down and Dustin hollering. He was getting farther off. I was surprised he didn't come here first. Freddie leaned his head on my arm. I remember being about as content right then as I ever was in my whole childhood. I've gone back to that moment a lot. I was 8 years old and I was completely safe for about 5 more minutes. Because that's when the trailer's back door opened. The side where the woods were. The door none of us kids ever used because the steps under it were gone and it was a 4-foot drop to the ground. I heard the sound of that exact door, which stuck at the bottom and let go with a pop. I had time to think, Dustin's coming in the back to be sneaky. Then the first footstep came down, and it made my whole body go cold. I recognized it instantly. I've described it to you before. Slow and heavier than it should have been. Weight placed down, not dropped, with every step eased onto. But because it was an old trailer, that step would make the floor bend and creak anyway. Too long of pauses. Listening pauses. The first time, I'd heard that walk through the walls in the dark, and I'd had 8 months now to talk myself out of it. Now it was a little more than a dozen feet away, with nothing between us but sheetrock and a leaning closet door. I knew that was no kid. Kids in an abandoned trailer at night sound like a drawer of silverware going down the stairs. This was heavy and cautious. Right behind that came the worst thought I've ever had in my life. If it's a grown-up, why is a grown-up sneaking into the empty trailer in the dark? Freddie started to say something. Probably, "Is that Dustin?" But I got my hand over his mouth as quickly as I could, and I put my lips right to his ear, saying very, very quietly, "Don't say anything. Stay still." God bless that little boy, 'cause he actually listened. He went stiff as a board under my arm, and we listened to it coming up the trailer. It came slow. Sometimes it stopped for so long, I started to hope it was gone, or that I misheard it. But then the floor would groan again, and it would be closer. I think it was checking the rooms. I could tell by the steps, and it made my stomach go sour. It was looking for things, for people, for something. It reminded me too much of the exact game we were playing. Hide and seek. Move, stop, listen, move on. It was doing what Dustin was supposed to be doing out there, looking for whoever was hiding. I could follow it down the hall by the boards as they creaked. Then it was at the bedroom doorway. A moment later, it was in the room. Through the 2-inch gap, I could see a single slice of that room. A stripe of gold carpet, a stripe of wall, the bottom half of the bare window, blue-gray. Suddenly, a shape came over that window, blotting it out. And I'm going to tell you what I saw, with nothing extra, the same way Gary Ray Donovan would. It was much too tall for the room. Those trailer ceilings were about 7 feet to 8 feet, and it stood with its head bowed, its neck bent forward, because it didn't fit. Its head was up near the ceiling, tipped down and forward, like a man trying to stand in an attic. In that little bit of light, it was a black shape, a silhouette with very wide shoulders, and no neck to speak of beyond thickness with a head out in front of it. There was hair, not short fur like a dog, but longer. When it moved, the window light caught the loose hair hanging along one arm, and the legs. The legs are what people fixate on when I say this, and I understand that. Because what I saw were bent backwards legs. That's how I put it when I was 8, and that's how I'll always put it. But I can tell you now what I was actually looking at. Legs built like a canine's back legs. The long haunch, the knee that points backwards but isn't really a knee. The long lower part angling down to a foot that walked flat when it walked slow. On an animal, you never think about it twice. On something 6.5 feet tall standing upright in a bedroom, there is nothing right about it anywhere. My eyes kept trying to turn it into a man in a costume, and kept failing. A man's legs don't stand at those angles. No costume weighs enough to make a floor sound like that. It stood in the middle of that room, and it sniffed the air with those big, slow pillow breaths. The Curtis sound again, the sound I'd heard at my door. It pulled at the air slowly, paused a bit, then did another one, the head tipping a little with it. And while it did that, its eyes were completely closed. There was just enough light to see that the face was tipped down and lit from the side, and there was no shine of an eye anywhere. The whole thing stood like it was concentrating. It stood there with its eyes shut, taking in these slow drags of air, quiet as a person in a library, and it wasn't rooting around like an animal in the trash. It was more like watching a man stand still, listening for something. It was going over that room with its nose. Against my side, I felt poor Freddie shaking, one long shiver that didn't stop, and I felt a warmth spread against my hip and down the shelf board. There was a small sound afterward, a dripping on the wood, and I understood quickly that Freddie had just soiled himself, and I had no way to blame the poor boy. And I also had a thought, real clear and real calm. It's going to smell that. The eyes shot open. It was so quick I don't think I even saw them open exactly. The head stopped in the middle of a drag of air, held still, and turned. And there was the least little gray shine down low in the dark of the face, and the snout. There was a snout, a long, dog-like face. I'd managed not to see it until the head turned sideways. The window light showed the outline of it for a second, and that snout came around, pointing at the closet. Not at the wall, but at the gap, at the crack of that leaning door, and at the dark the two of us were hiding in. At me. And it came. No hesitation. That's what the movies get wrong. There was no slow realization, no curious tilt of the head. The second it had us, it moved. 3 steps across that room, the floor suddenly loud because it quit trying to be quiet, just like before, and there was a sound out of it. Low, more breath than voice, a growl with almost no volume in it. Is that the sound a dog makes, right before it really attacks? My arm was around Freddie, and I had no plan. The leaning door began to move. The light in my gap went dark, and along the edge of the slider, right at the height of my hair, fingers came around the door. I saw them, 4 inches away from my face, a sight that comes back to me every single night. Fingers, not a paw. Not claws. Fingers, covered in dark hair down to the last knuckle, ending in nails. They curled around the edge of that door one at a time, and the door shifted on its bad track with a little knock, and the gap got an inch wider. Freddie went so rigid, I thought his back would snap, or that he was already dead. But then headlights swept over the room. Through the bare window, big and sudden, they ran across the ceiling. A vehicle was turning up the loop, close by. Not long after, muffled and no mistaking it, was a man's voice outside, calling my name. The fingers stopped moving. Everything about the thing stopped. Then the head came up fast and turned toward the window. It perked. The head came up and cocked toward the sound exactly like a dog in the yard when a car door slams. Then it left us just like that. It lost all interest in us. It crossed over to the far window, and through the wider gap I watched it. It reached up to the bottom of the sash, and its fingers found the little brass lock and turned it. It fumbled once. The lock was stiff. The trailer was swollen up with damp, and it adjusted its grip and turned it, pushing the sash up slow, holding the weight so it wouldn't bang. And it climbed out. Something that big going through a trailer window should look ridiculous, but it did not. It folded up and went through one backwards leg, and then the big bowed back, and then gone. The sash came down behind it, lowered carefully, almost all the way, leaving just an inch. You leave a window like that when you plan on coming back. It knew what a window lock was. Somewhere along the line it had learned to open window locks, and every single thing it had done from that first footstep, like the back door instead of the front, the pauses and the softness, the standing still with its eyes shut, all of that was practiced. It had been practicing being quiet around us for years. You don't get that quiet unless you've spent a long time not wanting to be seen. The front door banged open, and light went everywhere. A flashlight. Then my dad's voice filled the trailer. He sounded scared and angry, calling out my name, and I lost it. I leapt out of that closet, dragging Freddie with me, and I crossed that room in a second. I remember hitting my dad at full speed in the hallway, the flashlight banging off a wall. I made a sound I'd never made before, and Freddie was making it too. My poor dad stood in a rotten trailer at 7 o'clock at night, 2 kids screaming into his jacket, and one of them was soaked in pee. We were both trying to tell what happened to my dad, and I got out the only words I had. Don't. It went out the window, and I felt him stop. I felt it through his chest, him going still. He didn't say it. He didn't ask me what or who went out the window. When a kid tells you something went out the window, it's almost natural to immediately respond, "What went out the window? What are you talking about?" But he never asked. He put the light on that far window, sashed down to an inch, and held the light on that inch. Then he turned it off, picked up Freddie with one arm, and took my hand with the other. And he said to me, low and serious, "We're walking to the car now. Do not let go of me." We crossed that gravel in the dark, and my dad, a man I once watched pick a copperhead up off our steps with a garden rake, like it was a piece of trash, walked us to that car with his head going side to side the whole time, watching the tree line, watching the corners of the trailer. Here's why my dad came looking for me that night. It's because of my mother. He'd gotten home from his shift and found her on the bathroom floor, passed out, drunk, or maybe it was the pills she had taken too. She was breathing, barely. He got her to bed. Then he came to find me, because despite his life falling apart, his kid was not going to walk in and find her mother on the bathroom floor like that. That's why he came. He wasn't coming to save me from a monster. He didn't know there was a monster. He just didn't want me to see what was at home. He drove Freddie to Jesse's place first and walked him right to the door himself. I watched from the car while he stood on the steps talking to Jesse's mother. It was a long talk, a lot longer than it takes to explain a scared kid with wet pants. Both of them had their heads down at the end of it, and Jesse's mother looked over once at me, then once quickly at the tree line. Then we drove out past the Donovan pastures in the dark and got a room at the motel by the highway. He told me it was our adventure. He bought me crackers and a Coke from the machine, and we watched TV in our coats on top of the covers. I fell asleep against his arm with the lamp on. Neither one of us moved to turn it off. My parents divorced that spring. My dad got full custody, which in that place, in that era, tells you everything the judge must have heard. We got this rent house in town near the plant, with sidewalks and streetlights and a real wood floor over a real foundation. That floor never made a sound. Thank God. My mother stayed on at the park a year or so and then moved away. Different towns, and the phone calls got further and further apart. She died when I was 13 of an overdose. I've had my whole adult life to figure out how I feel about her. The honest answer is that I keep it put away. I don't like to talk about it much. Actually, my dad never said one thing bad about her. That should tell you what kind of man he is, if the rest of this hasn't. We were happy, too. That's how the story ends, with us being happy. A girl and her dad in a little house in town actually happy. He never missed a school play of mine. We rebuilt a truck carburetor together, and he refers to that night when he found me and Freddie. Teases me about my werewolf, or you remember your werewolf. He'll bring it up around my husband or whoever's at the table. Scared the pee out of that neighbor kid, and I mean that literally. Comes running out of the trailer hollering about a werewolf, and everybody laughs when he says it, and I'll roll my eyes. But let me point out a few things. I've never said werewolf. Not that night. Not ever. That was his word, he just suddenly referred to it as. Not mine. He has never asked me one question about that night. Not once in 25 years. My father, who wanted every detail of my third grade day, as I said, and still asks follow-up questions about grocery store runs, he has never once said, "So what did you see?" I noticed whenever he tells that joke, he doesn't quite look at me. Last Thanksgiving, my husband played along with him and asked, "So what was it really she saw? A coyote? Somebody's dog got in there?" My dad said, "Oh, who knows?" It took me until later that night to figure out what was bothering me about his reaction. 25 years of that joke, and he has never once offered an explanation. Not a dog or a coyote or a drifter or a child's nightmare. Any of those were easy layups. But instead he just says, "Who knows?" Remember, my dad went under our trailer back then. A couple days after something walked our hallway in the dark. My father crawled under there and came out quiet. Nowadays I know he saw something. Tracks or hair caught on the torn skirting, or a spot where something big had been bedding down. I'm not sure what it is, but I know he saw something. I'm not sure whatever became of that trailer park. I don't want to go back. Just bad memories. But whatever comes of the trailer park, the hardwood bottoms are still there. They're not going anywhere. But to whoever finds them or stumbles upon them, it's snaky in there. That's all I can say. Snaky in there. This story creeped me out pretty good. That first big scene where she's in the trailer at night with something else. God, you made me have to get up from my seat and look around for a moment. Congrats, and thank you for the creepy story, Snaky. Good night. Thank you all so much for tuning in to this episode of Unexplained Encounters. I've been your host, Darkness Prevails. You can find me on X at Dark Prevails, and you can send me your scary stories at darkstories.org. Support the show, get ad-free listening, unlock bonus stories, and more by going to erie.fm/premium and signing up to be a premium member. Till next time, everyone, stay safe out there and stay creepy, because this world is a strange one. Alright, so bear with me here. For old time's sake, I want to take a break from these single stories this week and just do some various short stories people have been sending me. Don't worry, because the longer stories will be back next week. For now, buckle up for some ghosts of Gettysburg, werewolves in the Ozarks, and that thing that's been eating someone's cows. This is Unexplained Encounters. Be sure to follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or your favorite podcast app. and send me your scary stories at darkstories.org. You can also find more scary stories narrated by me on my other show, Tales from the Break Room, also on your favorite podcast app. Now, let's begin. Warning. The following story contains depictions of violence against pets and animals. A werewolf ate my friend's dog. From Netherwolf. I am submitting this for a close friend who wants to remain anonymous. That being said, I've known him for a long time, and he's not the attention-seeking sort. He wrote this story down and asked me to submit it to the show. These are his words. My story takes place where I've hunted all my life. I won't give away the exact location because it's on private property, and I doubt the actual owner, who I've known since I was a kid, would appreciate that. What I will tell you is that it is a heavily forested stretch of about 200 acres in the foothills of the Ozarks. Near the northern edge of the property, the forest gives way to a large glade where whitetails often forage in the early mornings of the fall hunting season. That day I made my way down the gravel roads to the pull-off closest to the glade. Beside me, Brutus sat on the passenger seat, his huge blocky head lying lazily on the center console. Brutus was easily the best dog I ever had. I still don't know what breed he was. I found him at a rescue shelter a few weeks after I was discharged from the Marines. I knew the moment I saw him he was exactly what I needed to readjust to civilian life. I also knew from the size of his paws that he was going to be enormous, which was fine by me. I have never been too keen on little yappy dogs. I needed a man's dog, the kind who would be my ride or die, the kind who had my same warrior spirit. We bonded almost immediately. I wasn't wrong about Brutus being enormous either. By the time he was a year old, he stood nearly 3 feet at the shoulder, weighing almost 200 pounds. My best guess? He was either a Rottweiler or Mastiff of some kind, crossed with a Great Dane. His massive head almost more resembled a bear than a dog, and every inch of him was solid, lean muscle. His coat was short and dense, but his color was brindle, rather than the iconic black and brown of a Rottie. When we got to the pull-off, I retrieved my rifle from the cab of the truck, slinging it over my back. It was a Sig Sauer M400, which my brother had given me for Christmas the year before. I had taken it to the range a few times, enough to know how it behaved, but I hadn't had the opportunity to hunt with it yet. Honestly, apart from the selector switch, it wasn't that different from the M271 used overseas. I had 2 sights mounted on the rifle. A red dot sat on a 45-degree offset for close work. For longer shots, I ran a top-mounted mid-range optic with a night vision option. It wasn't highly magnified, but from where I planned to set up, it would do the job. I also brought my sidearm, a 9mm Glock 19. Obviously, I didn't plan to shoot a deer with it, but in Arkansas, concealed carry is easy, and I never go anywhere without it. The smell out there brought me back to my childhood. You know the smell if you spend any time outdoors? That earthy, slightly damp smell of earth and fallen leaves, and the faint, sweet scent of pine sap. That, combined with the smell of gasoline exhaust from the four-wheeler I'd brought on a trailer, was more appealing to me than any perfume or cologne. I prefer to hunt in the early morning, but that was a Sunday, and to me, worship is more important. By the time I got to my stand, it was about 90 minutes before sundown. It only gave me about an hour for deer, but I intended to be there well into the night. The same glade we have baited for deer is also frequented by coyotes in search of bedded down fawns, and coyotes are not something you want in an area you want to hunt deer in. In Arkansas, coyotes are considered a nuisance species, which means anyone with a license can get a permit to hunt them year-round with no bag limit. I dismounted the four-wheeler and unlocked the ladder guard. Brutus jumped down too, circling the tree looking for a place to leave his mark. He was such a good dog. The moment I called him and told him to stay, he laid himself at the base of the tree, his big ol' head over one paw, content to just be with me. The reason the stand had a ladder guard was because this particular stand was permanent. It was set on an ancient oak, the kind with big, gnarly roots shooting out in all directions, and so big around that 5 men could not wrap their arms around it at the base. It towered up over the smaller trees to give a perfect view of the glade. That ladder had been permanently secured to the massive trunk and climbed up about 40 feet to the stand that was fixed in the fork of the trunk and a branch twice as thick as my torso. The ladder guard was to make sure that, on the off chance someone else found our little honey hole, they wouldn't have access to the best vantage point. There wasn't even a whisper of a breeze, and as I sat there in the quiet, I was tempted to just close my eyes and sleep. If you're a hunter, you know, there's nothing more peaceful than sitting in a stand, listening to the orchestra of the forest, with no one else around to disturb you. I kept a watchful eye on the glade, scanning with my binoculars for any movement. Most of the time in the evening, deer are more cautious and will often wait just at the edge of a glade before eventually and slowly making their way in to graze. I didn't see anything for a while, apart from the random squirrel and one particularly fat raccoon. But then I noticed high above the glade, 2 vultures circling as they often do over a kill. Before long, they swooped down and landed, feeding on what I could only assume was a carcass of some kind, which I could not see through the tall grass. I watched as the moon, which was nearly full, began to illuminate the otherwise pitch darkness. Before long, a thick, hazy fog began to gather over the ground. For several hours, everything was peaceful and still. Then I heard it. The hills erupted with the yowls and yips of coyotes. It echoed through the trees, and I thought it was likely only a few of them. To the untrained ear, it can sound like a lot more than that. I scanned the tree line beyond the glade, sure that at any moment, one of those murderous canines would come trotting out, following the scent of whatever carrion the vultures had left behind. The yipping faded away, and for a moment, the night was silent once again, until another sound came riding on the still air. This time, though, it was not the high-pitched communicatory calls of coyotes. It was a desperate yelping. It was the sound a canine makes when it is panicked or in pain. It rang out as if crying and pleading, and then was abruptly cut off. Every hair on my body began to stand on end from the top of my head all the way down to my feet. It was a familiar but unwanted sensation, one that I had not personally felt in years. It was an instinct born of bullets whizzing overhead and IEDs exploding in ditches, the sensation of mortal danger. And it was close. As if on cue, I heard Brutus, who had perked up and now stood facing the glade. His deep, rumbling growl told me he felt it too. I looked down to where Brutus was standing like a statue, tall and menacing, and his hackle stood like a lion's mane around his back and shoulders. He was snarling, staring off through the trees at something I did not yet see. I shushed him. At first he ignored me, which was not like him at all. But when I snapped my fingers, he seemed to come back to himself. I shushed him again, and he lay down where he was, but not as if to sleep. That dog was alert, ready to jump into action at any moment. I brought my attention back to the binoculars, which had a night vision feature, and what I saw made my heart begin to race. This was no coyote loping out into the glade. It was far too big, even to be a wolf, even if we had wolves in Arkansas, which we don't. This thing was far bigger than even the largest of gray wolves, though the shape of its head, its pointed ears and long snout, its dark and shaggy fur, all seemed more wolf-like than wild dog. Were it not for its long, lanky limbs and graceful lope, I might have guessed it was a bear. There are plenty of black bear in the Ozarks, but whatever this was, its gait was far too smooth to be the lumbering shuffle of a bear. I watched as it approached the place where the vultures had fed. If there was any doubt in my mind that this thing was not a natural creature, All doubt was erased when it stood upright like a man and let out a howl unlike anything I'd ever heard before or since. At first, it was like a wolf, a long, drawn-out bay that raised in pitch. But it didn't stop there. It continued to get higher and higher until it sounded almost like a bull elk. It was then that I dropped the binoculars and picked up my rifle. Through the scope, I watched as the beast dropped back to the ground, not on all fours, but into a position similar to someone in a full squat. I watched it pick up something and raise it to its mouth with what I could clearly see were eerily human-like hands. I did not intend to shoot at it. I was desperately hoping it would get bored and wander off, back into the woods. Of course, that's not what happened. All at once, a gentle breeze began to blow against my back and down toward the creature. I stiffened when it snapped its head up, lifting its nose to the wind for a moment, then turned to look at me. I had no doubt that it saw me. It dropped whatever it was chewing, never looking away from me. It stood and turned and took a single step in my direction before I finally pulled the trigger. The shot was true. I know it was true. When you've hunted as many animals as I have, you know what a kill shot looks like. Its chest rippled slightly a split second before a fine spray of blood, bright and glowing in the thermal night vision, exploded from its back, and it dropped like a sack of grain. That's another way to know it's a kill shot. Ask any hunter and they'll tell you. There's no greater relief than when the animal they shoot immediately drops where it was standing, because it means they won't have to chase it down. I slid down the ladder, jumping on the ATV. I whistled at Brutus to jump on the back, and we took off to find out what the creature really was. It was even more terrifying up close. Illuminated by the headlights of the four-wheeler, it was clearer than ever that what I was looking at, and I still can't believe I'm writing this, was some kind of werewolf-like or dog-man or whatever other name you want to call it. I had just stepped off the vehicle when the thing moved. It was just a twitch at first, the kind of hypnic jerk that people have when they dream they're falling. Before I had time to bring my rifle around, it had rolled back to all fours and turned to face me, snarling and emitting a growl so loud and deep and resonant that I felt it reverberating in my chest. That's when I noticed its eyes. They were bright green, but they weren't like a dog's eyes. They were smarter, brighter, more intelligent. There was an awareness there that I've only ever seen in the eyes of another human being. What happened next only took a split second, but it seemed at the moment to unfold in slow motion. Its muscles tensed. It was getting ready to lunge at me. I let my rifle fall on its sling and held out my left hand out of instinct, preparing to brace the impact and give myself a little room to shoot as I reached for the Glock 19 holstered in my belt. I was too slow. It was in the air before my hand even reached the pistol grip. Its teeth were bared, its mouth was open, ready to tear into me. I was sure it was going to rip my arm clean off before I had a chance to shoot. But it never got to me. There was a blur in my peripheral vision, just as Brutus slammed into the creature's side hard enough to cause it to roll sideways. It was back on its feet in the blink of an eye, Brutus standing between us. Despite Brutus's massive size for a dog, he was still dwarfed by this creature. He lunged at it the same moment I pulled my Glock and leveled the sights over the monster's chest. I still see what happened next in my nightmares. The creature caught Brutus by the throat with one hand and chomped down hard on the back of his neck. It shook violently, and Brutus was then sent rolling away, yelping and crying. I emptied the entire 15-round capacity into the creature's chest. It stumbled back briefly, each impact causing it to twitch for a moment, but it never fell. I pulled the trigger until it clicked empty, and still it continued to come towards me. I've been shot at before. I've seen a Humvee blown apart by a roadside bomb right in front of me. I've had to take cover when enemy RPGs exploded around my position, but I have never been more afraid than I was in that moment. 15 9mm bullets should have been enough to kill just about anything, but it just kept coming. Its muscles tensed again, and I could tell it was about to charge. But just before it did, Brutus latched himself onto the back of the wolf's leg, pulling for all he was worth. It was just enough to pull it back to all fours, giving me a chance to bring up my rifle. I fired over and over until the magazine was empty, but I might as well have been shooting a ballistic dummy. It turned its attention back to Brutus, who was still pulling and thrashing his head side to side with everything he had. With a single swipe of its paw, it hit Brutus so hard that he had to let go. I had another magazine for my rifle in the rucksack that was secured to the front rack of the ATV. I ran for it as Brutus and that dogman werewolf thing circled each other, growling and snarling. I dropped the empty magazine and slammed the full one home, working the charging handle with practiced efficiency. I brought it up just in time to see the creature kill my dog. I won't go into great detail here. Honestly, it's too painful. Suffice it to say that Brutus was no longer in one piece, and there was nothing I could have done. In that moment, I had a choice. I could stay and shoot and hope that one of my bullets would put this thing down for good. Or I could drive like hell for the stand and hope this thing could not climb. I chose the latter. I don't know if it could have caught me or not. It didn't try, at least not right away. I drove away throttle wide open, trying not to think about the fact it was eating my best friend. When I reached the stand, I climbed as fast as I could, only stopping to make sure the ladder gate closed as much as possible. Obviously, it wasn't designed to be locked from the top, but it was better than leaving it wide open. When I got back into the stand, I picked up my binoculars and followed the tire trail through the tall grass to where the creature was the last time I saw it. But it was not there. I scanned the glade again, but I could not see any movement other than the tall grass swaying in the gentle breeze. I smelled it before I saw it. That coppery metallic scent of blood registered in my nose only moments before the growling registered in my ears. I stood trying not to panic and scanned the base of the tree, or at least the side of it that I could see. The tree was so large and the stand was positioned in such a way I could only see a small section of it. It wasn't long before I saw the wolf-like creature again. It was circling the tree, clearly looking for a way to get to me. Once it saw me, it never looked away for very long. The way it assessed the tree was more than just animalistic. It seemed more intelligent than that. It looked from branch to branch as if estimating which branches could hold him and which could not, and whether or not the ones that looked strong enough were reachable. I thought for sure I was safe. This tree had lower branches, but the first one that was thick enough to bear the weight of a man was at least 14 or 15 feet off the ground. No man or wolf could jump that high. But I was wrong. With one motion, it leapt up the trunk, pushing halfway up, with its hind paws digging into the bark, and landed on the sturdy branch. He was almost halfway to me already. I knew if I didn't do something, it would only be a matter of time before he figured out a way to get to me. I aimed down at it with my rifle, firing 3 rounds in quick succession. I know one of them hit, because it yipped, but in the darkness I couldn't tell where or how much damage had been done. It couldn't have been much, because the creature didn't even slow down. It leapt again. This time it overestimated how much the target branch could hold. It snapped under its weight, and it plummeted all the way to the ground with a thud. It took a moment to recover, then tried again. But this time I was ready. I waited until it was mid-jump and fired center mass. It was just enough to send it to the ground again. They say the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. This creature was decidedly not insane. After the third attempt, which I again thwarted with my rifle, it seemed to reconsider. It circled the tree until it found the ladder. It didn't take long for it to swing the gate open and start to climb. I could have fired at it again, but I knew I only had a handful of bullets left, that once those were gone, I'd be a sitting duck. I had to think quick. I remembered then, I had bear spray in the backpack I'd brought up the tree with me the first time. I know what you're thinking. Why would someone in Arkansas have bear spray? You have to understand, Marines are ingrained from day one with the importance of being ready for anything. The truth is, the last time I'd been to our local sporting goods store, they had one for sale, and I bought it, thinking you never know when you might need it. I pulled the pin and emptied the entire can, covering the wolf thing in the top part of the ladder in a yellow haze of pure capsaicin. It worked better than I could have hoped. It was nearly halfway up the ladder when the bear spray hit it full in the face. For the first time, I heard it truly yelp. It let go of the rails and pushed away with its legs to escape the cloud. It crashed to the ground, yelping and sneezing in that way only dogs do. I guess that was enough. It took only a few moments for it to regain its senses enough to run off into the night. I never saw it again. I sat back in the stand, my head resting against the rough bark. I reloaded my nearly empty magazine with shaking fingers, just in case it came back. But it didn't. Still, I didn't even try to make my way down until the light of dawn crept over the eastern horizon. In case you're wondering, I didn't leave Brutus there in the field. I took him home and gave what was left of him a proper burial. I still have his collar hanging on my rearview mirror. His leash is still where I left it, hanging on the hook by my front door. I don't think I'll ever be able to bring myself to get rid of it. Every time I look in the rearview, I'm reminded of the night I lost my best friend and the seemingly invincible creature who took him from me. I don't share this story to get sympathy, but rather as a warning. If you're going to be in the Ozarks at night, be prepared for anything. If you have a sidearm, bring it. If you don't have bear spray, get some and bring that too. You never know what you might run into. Now I know. There is something in the Ozarks, and if you're not careful, you might end up on the menu. A Night in Gettysburg, from Silver Bullet 54. Anybody who's been to Gettysburg in Pennsylvania has realized if they were there on July 4th, 1863, they would be seeing red splotches everywhere around them, due to the longest, single, and deadliest multi-day battle in the Civil War. More than 51,000 men ended up killed, wounded, captured, or missing. There was even a civilian killed when a bullet went awry and hit a woman who was baking bread for soldiers, killing her instantly. Nowadays, the area is considered a hotbed for hauntings, as all those lives ended in a split second, and the ghosts either can't or won't move on. I went there on vacation once, and had 3 strange incidents happen. The first happened at the battlefield itself. I'm not sensitive to the paranormal, like some people might claim to be, but the entire time I was there, I kept feeling like I was being followed or even watched. Every time I looked around, anyone else there was either taking pictures or talking. No one even glanced in my direction. Eventually, I walked towards the Devil's Den and Little Round Top. The Devil's Den was an area of nothing but rocks and stones that had been covered with dead and dying soldiers, and Little Round Top was where the Union held off wave after wave of Confederate soldiers. That was what gave the Union their first major victory, spelling the beginning of the end for the South, as that battle started off a steady stream southward deep into the Confederacy. As I was looking around, I saw what looked like 5 people hiking up a small hill into a bunch of trees. I called out to them, but not a single one responded. A few moments later, I saw the same thing. 5 people going up the hill and into the trees. A moment later, it happened again. I now realized it was a residual haunting, likely Union soldiers marching up that hill over and over for eternity. This next one was the most terrifying. I was walking down 123 Carlisle Street, across from the Farnsworth House Inn. I happened to glance at it and saw a man staring at me with his teeth bared. I blinked to make sure it wasn't shadows or a reflection. He was still there, staring at me. I soon saw that he had on an expensive gray uniform and hat. I then remembered stories of an evil soldier haunting that inn. Allegedly, he had holed up there to hide, but when Union soldiers found out, they went all out to kill him. And to this day, all the bullet holes on the wall show that he didn't go down without a fight. People eventually decided to just not go into the inn unless there was a good reason to do so. They say that soldier gives off such feelings of anguish, doubt, and fear that even the bravest explorer can't go to the front door without being scared off. As I stared, his eyes followed me with every step. Eventually, the soldier vanished when the window was about out of sight. That made me stick to the other side of the street. The least scary thing was when I went into a nice and homey eatery. The Dobbin House Tavern, that's what it was called. The building was rumored to be haunted by the kind and friendly ghost of Reverend Andrew Dobbin, the original builder of the place. People say they can feel him sitting at their table as they eat, and one woman even claimed to hear him suggest the gingerbread. Can't confirm or deny, as I wasn't there at the time. As I sat, I did feel a few cold drafts, even though it was May, only around 5 p.m., and the temperature outside that day was close to 80. I also noticed that the candle was flickering a bit without any wind at all, which can happen with ghosts, according to what I've heard. After I'd eaten, I got up to leave and bumped into, well, nothing. I asked out loud for the wall to move and heard a small chuckle as I walked out. So is Gettysburg haunted? I give that question a resounding yes. I simply can't explain away what happened at the battlefield, Farnsworth Inn too, or the tavern. I do plan to go to Gettysburg again. Who knows what will happen next? I at least hope it's really interesting. Some quick notes about the following story. First, be warned, it contains depictions of violence against pets and animals. Second, this is a good example of a fun story that is a terrible fit for unexplained encounters. For me, anyway, this goes beyond the realm of believability. I greatly appreciate the submission, but please label it as a creepypasta if it's clearly a work of fiction. Thank you. I watched my uncle's ranch while he was away. I'm never going back. From Kill M Artist. So, the past few days have been really stressful. My friend suggested that I should write about what happened to me and share it on this page, but I don't know how this is supposed to make me feel better. I guess in a way it could be a warning to others, but I highly doubt anyone would believe this anyway. It all started when I got a call from my Uncle Shag last week. His real name was Chuck, but I've always called him Shag, on account of his shaggy beard ever since I was little. That's not important though. Anyway, his appendix had burst, and he had to go in for surgery to get it removed. He asked me if I could house sit for him, get some work done around his ranch while he was in the hospital. Stuff like feed his livestock, fix the fences, simple things that he would normally do himself. I told him I could, and asked if I could bring my dog Bear, since I had just adopted him, and I didn't have anyone to look after him while I was gone. He said I could, as long as he didn't bother the animals. Now, I had not been to my uncle's ranch in a few years. It was in a desert area in Utah, but I still knew how to get there. So I made sure to pack whatever I would need for a few days there, some movies since there was no Wi-Fi at the ranch, and a couple of snacks for me and dog food for Bear. It was going to be a 2-hour ride, and I had not yet eaten lunch, so I stopped by a fast food drive-thru, ordering myself a veggie patty, diet soda, and a small patty for Bear to eat. On the drive to the ranch, I noticed deer carcasses on the side of the road. At the time, I didn't give it a second thought. I supposed it wasn't too strange to find dead deer out here, but that many at once? I should have known better. A few minutes later, I would drive up to my uncle's ranch. I parked near the house that was farthest from the cattle, so they didn't get spooked and run away. As soon as I opened the door to let Bear out, he sprinted right to the cows. He barked and ran around a few of the cows wanting to play, but some walked away and others just ignored him. After about 2 minutes of trying to make new friends, Bear gave up and went to do his business, marking his territory. I smiled at Bear. I had a feeling he was going to have fun here. I turned my head to see a cow staring at me. The thing was thin. I mean, I could tell it had some meat on its bones, but also that it was becoming emaciated. I looked down to see that it must have been looking at the burger. I was holding it in my hand at the moment. "Whoa, it's a veggie patty, buddy. I'm on your side," I said, jokingly, as I raised it and pointed at it. Suddenly, I heard Bear yelp. I dropped my burger and ran towards him to see what was wrong. He had stepped on a broken piece of cactus. I quickly pulled out the thorns from his paw while he growled each time, but afterwards I was rewarded with licks to my face. I spent the rest of the day doing chores and working around the ranch. I won't bore you with the details of the work, but there was one peculiar thing that happened throughout the day. Bear kept growling at the anemic cow from a distance. He just wouldn't go near the thing. He would even grab my pant legs if I was heading in its direction. It was definitely strange, but I thought the cow was sick, and Bear didn't want either of us to catch whatever it had. Animals are funny like that. They can sense what humans can't. That should have tipped me off that something was wrong. By the time I got dinner ready for Bear and me, the sun was already setting. My uncle left me a note telling me that his neighbor went grocery shopping before I came and left their number in case I needed them. Again, there was no Wi-Fi all the way out here, but there was a landline that I could use. "This is just like what the pioneers used back in the day," I joked to myself, knowing no one was around to laugh. I set Bear's bowl down and made my way to the living room. Uncle Shag didn't have cable, but he did have an old VHS player. As I set my food down on the living room table, I searched for something to watch. I ended up choosing Mel Brooks' Young Frankenstein. When that was finished, I rewound the tape and chose Monty Python and the Holy Grail to watch next. I ended up falling asleep during the movie. I looked at the clock. 12:09. Past midnight. I hadn't finished my dinner yet, but decided to just have the leftovers tomorrow. I got up and headed towards the guest room with Bear following me. I changed into a pair of boxers and got into bed. I fell right back to sleep as soon as I got in that bed. I could feel the weight of Bear as he jumped on the bed and lay his body on my legs, using my stomach as a pillow. The last thing I remembered before I gave myself up to the sweet relaxation of sleep was petting Bear's head. I was awakened with the sound of a high-pitched yelp. I quickly got up, and in the process I woke up Bear. No, that's not right. It was more like he was awakened by the same sound. I thought it came from him at first, but a few seconds later, we heard the yelp again. It was longer by a few seconds. Bear began to quietly growl as the yelp slowly went from high-pitched to a lower tone. I looked out the window to see if it was a coyote. One of the chores I had here was to set up bear traps around the perimeter so predators couldn't hurt the livestock. But I didn't see anything. Nothing that suggested that there was something out there. I then left the guest room to see if I'd left the TV on before I'd headed to bed. And sure enough, I had. It was just static now, though. That yelping sound must have been coming from the movie before it ended and became static. I turned off the TV and made a mental note to rewind it in the morning. For the remainder of the night, there was no other disturbance. Bear calmed down as well. I checked the time before going back to sleep. It was 4:44 a.m. Morning arrived with the sound of a rooster making its iconic alarming sound. I got dressed and made breakfast for Bear and I. Scrambled eggs with a side of orange juice and dog food. I stepped out to get started with chores, but was absolutely horrified by what I found. There were mutilated corpses outside of 3 of the cows. They were spread apart in front of the fences, blood from each body colliding into one giant pool, and swarms of flies hovering over the remains. It's hard to talk about the details, but I'll try to be as thorough as I can. Each cow had its stomach ripped open, entrails spilling out like stuffing from a worn-out toy that's been neglected over the years. The thing I noticed next was their throats. They'd all been slit, as if someone had been trying to keep them from making noise. I was sick. The first thing I see in the morning is cow mutilation. I took a few steps and threw up. I ran towards the livestock after that, praying this was the only set of casualties. Luckily it was. The rest of the cows had been huddled together in a sort of protection formation. You see, for some herbivores that have young or sick members in their herd, they form a sort of barrier surrounding them so that predators can't get through to them. I looked around to see if there were any footprints of what had been here, of what had done this. Bear came out of the house at that point. He followed me as I searched for clues, but we ended up finding nothing. No blood trail, no footprints. I looked over again at the herd. I saw that one thin cow from yesterday. It was standing in the same place. If it hadn't been moving its tail every few seconds, I would have thought it was a cardboard cutout. The only difference from yesterday was that its entire snout was missing. I saw something similar a while ago when I was watching this nature documentary about African wildlife. There was a zebra drinking water from a watering hole, when suddenly a crocodile ripped its face off. To my shock, the zebra was still alive, but almost its entire face was missing, leaving nothing more than a gaping hole of exposed skull a few centimeters under its eyes. I thought then how cruel nature can be sometimes, and what was in front of me must have been another example. I went over to approach the poor thing, but Bear once again stopped me. He had jumped in front of me and growled for me to go the other way. It wasn't an aggressive growl, but more like he was warning me of something. I lowered myself and began to rub his head. "It's okay, buddy. I've got to go get something to put that poor thing out of its misery. Then I'll get a shovel to bury the rest of the cattle over there," I told him, still completely confused myself, not knowing who or what had done this. I went back into the house to get my uncle's double-barreled shotgun. It was going to be a messy outcome for that cow, but a quick one at least. Just as I loaded the gun, I heard the sound of Bear snarling like a mad dog. I thought the culprit had come back to finish off the rest of the herd, so I ran out as fast as I could. I came back to Bear barking at nothing, like he just chose a direction and began to bark like a mad dog. I noticed that the snoutless cow was not there anymore. I assumed it had wandered off to die on its own. I felt bad. I was about to end its life quickly, so it wouldn't have to suffer any longer. Just then, I realized something. Did whatever do this come back for that other cow? Is that why Bear is acting like this? I thought to myself, as I looked in the direction Bear was barking at. I put the shotgun away, and I went to get a shovel and some bear traps, which my uncle had in the shed. I was disappointed to see there was only one left in the shed. I thought he had more, but one was better than none. When I came back, I put the bear trap aside, and I started digging graves for the cows, after which I would walk towards the tractor. Now, cows weigh a crap ton, and I had a better chance at marrying a model than pushing one bare-handed into a grave. Bear followed me and jumped into the seat next to me as I drove towards the bodies. The first two took effort to lift, but they were easy to move as I lowered them into the pre-dug graves. However, the last body was lifted without ease compared to the other two. I lowered it back to the ground, then climbed out of the tractor. I could hear Bear growl slowly as I went to inspect that corpse. I lowered myself and tried to lift the body. It was still heavy, but I could get it off the ground for a few seconds before giving in. I ended up dropping the body, making it topple to its side so it faced me. I was shocked when I saw it had no snout. I was sure that, of the attack, only the surviving cow had a snout missing, but that one was nowhere to be seen. Upon further inspection, there was a very large slit down the cow's body. I brushed my fingers against it and saw that the slit opened like a purse. I gagged as I saw that there were no organs inside the corpse, only bone and muscle. My first thoughts weren't, why did it have no organs, or what did this? The thing I wanted to know the most was, if this corpse was the snoutless cow, where did the other body go, and why was this one so heavy? I got a sudden chill and stood up to check my surroundings. The atmosphere felt off. Just then, I flinched as I felt a drop of rain fall on my forehead, followed by a few more as the sky began to grow dark and shower the land. I finished burying the last corpse. Then I took Bear inside with me. Whatever work I had for that day could wait till tomorrow. A few hours went by, but the rain did not let up. It was even starting to thunder, which I didn't mind as much. But Bear whined and hid in a corner. His personality compared to earlier was like someone had flipped a light switch in his brain. I fed both of us and was about to find a movie to watch when the power went out. The only source of light I had at the moment was my phone. However, my uncle is prepared for times like this. I took a few candles from his closet and lit a few around the house. After lighting a third candle, I looked at the rain through a window. I couldn't see much but darkness and the occasional flash of lightning. I heard Bear whimper more, and I rubbed his back, letting him know that I'm here before I put a blanket around him. After dinner, I put my plate in the sink, and I thought of going to bed early, since there was nothing else for me to do. As I undressed, I looked through the bedroom window. A flash of lightning showed there was a figure near the cow's fence. I did a double take, but I couldn't see anything for a few seconds, not until the next flash of lightning struck. When it did, the figure was already inside the fence, and that flash caught the moment that it raised its arm and slit a cow's throat. That's the cow killer, I thought, as I ran out of the house. A dumb idea to do during a storm, I know, but if I didn't catch this guy now, then I didn't know when I would. I grabbed the double-barreled shotgun and made my way to where I last saw the figure. The only thing I found was a pool of blood, with a trail leading away from the fence. The herd of cows within the fence mooed in fear as the adults surrounded the young. I followed the trail for a few minutes before I stopped. I heard some sort of noise like something wet and meaty being torn apart. I tried to listen to where the noise was coming from, but as the sound of thunder roared, it stopped. I held my breath. Suddenly, a flash of lightning struck and revealed the figure 20 meters away from us. It was hunched over one of the cows, eating it while it was still alive. Before the light faded, I could barely recognize its appearance. It was a cow with a slitted throat. It began to slowly rise like it knew how to stand up like a person. When the next flash of lightning struck, it threw itself backwards and began to spider walk further away. I gasped and turned around, making a beeline back to the house with only the flashes of lightning to guide my way. I couldn't hear if the thing was following me or not, but I wasn't going to risk looking back. The sound of Bear's barking guided my way to the house as I drew closer. I would leap through the door and slam it shut, locking both locks on the door. Just as I did, my legs finally gave in as I dropped to the floor, clutching the shotgun tightly against my wet, cold chest. I kept repeating, "What was that? What was that?" in my head for the next 2 minutes as I began to hyperventilate. When you see something your brain cannot comprehend, it tries to rationalize what it could logically be by filling in the gaps with what it already knows to try and make it make sense. However, there was nothing about what I just saw that made any sense. Bear's barking was replaced with a low growl as he headed towards me. He watched the door as I slowly calmed down. "It's okay, Bear. It's okay," I said to calm him down. But really, I was just trying to reassure myself. I noticed Bear was slowly moving his head towards the window from the door. Then he got up and began walking along the wall like he was prowling side by side with whatever was outside. He stopped moving then and raised his head quickly to the ceiling. At the same time, I felt the house shake a little with the sound of a large thud coming from the roof. Bear must have lost the thing's position because he spun around trying to see where it was. Things were silent for a few seconds. Even Bear was quiet. There weren't any sounds of footsteps on the roof. Nothing, unless you counted my heartbeat, which was quickening. I decided to get up, trying to hide in a room until this cow monster or whatever it was left. I didn't even take a second step when I heard a voice. It sounded like Abby something, I thought. Abby Normal. It took me a few seconds, but then I realized it. It was a quote from Young Frankenstein, one of the movies I was watching last night. My blood went cold. Had it been right outside the house that night?
Jesus Christ!
It screamed, setting Bear off. He snarled and ran towards the bedroom. "Bear, wait!" I shouted as I followed after him. Bear rammed his head into the door, forcing it open, and he leapt towards the window. I stopped when I saw that the window was open, and a mixture of what looked like hooved fingers reached inside the house. Bright yellow lights appeared in the darkness outside. The eyes of that thing. Bear leapt at the creature, forcing it to retreat as he went out the window with it and chased after it. "Bear! Come back!" I shouted as I stuck my head out the window. I couldn't see where Bear was, but I could hear the sound of his barks, and another sound, a laugh. I didn't get any sleep that night. I locked myself in the bathroom and cried. I was so worried about Bear, and so scared of what that thing actually was. I prayed to God that Bear was okay and that he managed to drive off that thing. Morning came when the sound of a rooster crowed. I got dressed, arming myself with a hunting knife, my uncle's double-barreled shotgun, and left the house to search for Bear. I went to the side of the house where the bedroom window would be. I found muddy tracks belonging to Bear and another pair of tracks I assumed belonged to the creature. I followed these tracks for a good 5 miles, occasionally finding drops of blood mixed with mud, making me more concerned that I might not find Bear alive. After another half hour, I found something that I was not expecting. A pile of organs covered in mud and blood. The smell made me gag and tear up, and I was paranoid that they belonged to Bear. I then turned my head to see that there were more tracks. There's still hope, I thought. I followed the tracks for another 15 minutes, finding my way to the cow thing's corpse. I pulled out the hunting knife and stabbed it right in the head. I've seen too many scary movies and didn't want to risk a sneak attack, but sure enough, it seemed to be dead. I couldn't find any more footprints belonging to Bear, so I searched for another hour before I gave up. I couldn't find any more clues leading to Bear's whereabouts. I was so upset, so confused. It's almost like Bear just grew wings and disappeared. I wasn't in the mood to do anything all day. I know I had work to do, but I just couldn't do it. Bear was on my mind. I motivated myself to at least feed the livestock. After that, I just spent the rest of the time doing nothing. When dinner time came, I didn't eat. I made food for Bear just in case the smell attracted him back. As I opened the door, and I practically fell back and dropped the food, right in front of the house was Bear, sitting and staring at me. "Bear!" I shouted as I ran over to hug him. He felt off when I hugged him, though. It felt like I was hugging a bag of dried-up leaves. I pulled away and looked at him. Even his face seemed off. His pupils were so dilated that it almost looked like he had no irises at all. He wasn't panting, and now that I think of it, I don't think he was even breathing. "Bear?" I said. "Dinner's ready. You want to come eat?" As I walked inside, I kept the door open for Bear so he could get in. But he continued to sit there, staring at me, not making any movements at all. "What's wrong, Bear? Aren't you coming in?" I asked. Bear stayed where he was for another minute before coming inside at last. I picked up the food I'd dropped as he made his way towards the bedroom, and I soon followed after. When I entered the bedroom, Bear was sitting in front of the open window where he'd leapt out the night before. I closed it after putting his food bowl in front of him, and I went to make myself dinner. The rest of the night was uneventful. After eating, I went to bed early, but I woke up at 1:25 a.m. I had this feeling like I was being watched. I looked around but didn't see anyone there. The door was open, and I assumed that Bear went to sleep somewhere else. I shut my eyes and lowered myself back into bed so I could get comfy once more. My head hit the pillow, but then I opened my eyes by chance. I screamed. There was Bear on the ceiling. He was positioned like a spider waiting for its prey to get trapped in its web. I could see that his throat had been slit, the same way the cows had their throats slit. I realized then Bear did not kill the cow thing. It had killed him, and whatever had truly controlled that thing now controlled Bear. The bear thing must have seen the look of horror on my face, because it smiled in a way a dog could never smile. Too human. Suddenly, a pair of hands exited Bear's slitted throat as he leapt down from the ceiling. They tried to grab at my throat as Bear's mouth opened wide enough to bite my head. I took my pillow and smacked him with it, knocking him to the side of the bed as I ran out of the room. It wasn't long before Bear regained his footing and crawled along the walls to chase after me. The bear thing began to whine like it was hurt, but there's no way that pillow could have done damage. I tripped on a stack of movies and slammed my face into the wall. The bear thing jumped onto me, grabbing hold of my neck. Its mouth opened wider as the whine grew louder and more painful. I realized it wasn't forming the sound from its mouth. It sounded like it was playing a recording, a recording of it gutting Bear alive. It was making me listen to Bear's final moments on repeat. "What are you?" I shouted as I tried to loosen the hand's grip on my neck. The bear thing's mouth had shut around my head, digging its teeth into my head and chin. I was engulfed in the darkness of its mouth. Suddenly, I saw the same bright yellow lights from last night. The eyes were coming from inside the bear thing's mouth. They watched me as I struggled to free myself. I started to cry. I couldn't do anything else. The whining kept going, and it set me off. I rammed my head deeper into the bear thing's mouth, its teeth dragging against my skull, but it had also loosened its grip around my neck. I slammed my uncle's recliner on top of the monster, which gave me time to grab my car keys and run to my car. I had no time to grab my other things, or anything to defend myself with. I slammed the car door shut and locked it before starting the car. I was able to get away, despite a bruised throat and a few scratches. I looked in the rearview mirror to see something other than the bear thing. What I saw was an old naked woman. Her body was covered in a pattern of blood that looked like it was ritualistic. She was also wearing what looked to be a wolfskin over her body, covering her head, back, and arms. My stomach turned as I realized the wolfskin thing she was wearing was not wolf at all. It was bear. She had skinned him and wore him like one of those Laplander animal hats. I was on the verge of a panic attack as I saw the woman get on all fours and slowly move and look more perfectly like my deceased dog. She ran opposite of me then. I lost sight of her after a minute, and just as I did, all my emotions came out. The tears in my eyes blocked my view of the road. I blacked out as I hit a large rock and crashed, nearly throwing myself out of my car. I woke up in a hospital bed. Apparently, my uncle had recovered enough from his surgery and was on his way home when he saw me in my wrecked car. I was asleep for 3 days. The whole time he stayed by my side until I woke up. Of course, he had all sorts of questions he wanted to ask. I thought about my answers carefully. I thought no one would believe my experience at the ranch and about the woman that wore animal skins and became them. So I told my uncle that a wild cougar had attacked me at his home and had killed some of the livestock, and it had gotten my dog Bear. My uncle was saddened from the losses, but was just thankful I was alive. I stayed in the hospital for a few more days, my uncle never leaving my side. He drove me home after I recovered, but that would be the last time I saw him alive. I sit here writing about my experiences a few days after attending Uncle Shag's funeral. His ranch, you see, had caught fire, but I think he had been visited by the woman just like I had, and he had tried to defend himself. My heart is filled with nothing but guilt and regret. I keep thinking that I should have told the truth, even if it would have sounded insane. I mean, would you believe me? I wonder, though, when the woman visited him, did she go as Bear or some other animal whose skin she was wearing? I don't have any idea. I just wish I could see Uncle Shag and Bear to tell them I'm both sorry. Sorry that I didn't tell the whole story to my uncle, and sorry that I couldn't protect Bear. There's nothing more I can say. Just to whoever reads this, if you see a living animal with a slitted throat, run before it's too late. That was a nice change of pace. Some shorter stories to spice things up, and a werewolf in the Ozarks encounter to bat, just to remind me of the terrifying moments in my childhood. Perfect. Good night. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Unexplained Encounters. I've been your host, Darkness Prevails, and you can find me on X at Dark Prevails, on Rumble as Darkness Prevails, Or catch more scary stories narrated by me on my other show, Tales from the Break Room, airing every Tuesday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or your favorite podcast app. Till next time, everyone, stay safe out there and stay creepy, because this world is a strange one. Make this the best Halloween ever by pre-ordering my 2 brand new books coming out soon. The first is Phantom Phenomena, a hand-picked collection of the all-time scariest stories I've ever received, accompanied by atmospheric illustrations and field notes. Then there's Appalachian Folklore, an extraordinary catalog of the chilling history, creepy folklore, and rich culture of the Appalachians. These release October 15th and 8th, respectively. Pre-order now on Amazon and Barnes & Noble. But hurry, because the first 100 pre-orders to verify via the link in the description or at eeriecast.com/verify will receive an exclusive hoodie and hardcover copy of Lore, a folklore horror novel. When the biggest, toughest dog you've ever met starts running from something in the woods, you'd better start running too. Welcome back to Alone in the Woods. I'm Darkness Prevails, here to share with you scary eyewitness stories that happened in the great outdoors. Today's episode is a fun and terrifying one, featuring stories from all around the world, and a few of these tales are arguably some of the better ones I've heard in quite a while. Enjoy. If you have a scary story that happened outdoors, send it to me at eeriecast.com/outdoor so I can read it on the show. If you like what you hear, help us reach more listeners by leaving us a rating or review on Spotify and Apple, and subscribe to Darkness Prevails on YouTube. Thank you. Now, throw a log on the fire, because the night is still young. What the Dog Saw. From Enda Spirit World. When I was a kid, I was an outdoorsman, as was my friend Larry, who lived nearby. We lived in a rural area with lots of opportunities for that sort of thing. Across the street from our homes was a huge tract of timber, where we would hunt whatever was in season, or go camping and fishing at other times. My friend and I knew of a small private lake too, about 15 acres in size, located 2 miles through the woods from our houses. One night, we set out to gig some frogs for frog legs. The neighbor's huge dog, Bozo, so named for his giant feet, came along with us. When we were about a mile into the woods, we had what I've always felt was a supernatural experience. Off to our right, about 30 feet away, there appeared a blue glowing orb, several feet in diameter. It seemed quite bright, but it didn't illuminate the surroundings like a normal light would. It reflected off nothing. The night was just as dark as it had been, deep in that black pine forest. We all stopped in our tracks, and Bozo gave a deep, rumbling growl. It was somewhat comforting to have Bozo there with us. He was mostly Great Dane and weighed more than 100 pounds. We walked on, maybe another 100 yards, and the light appeared again. This time, Bozo didn't make a sound. He bolted back for home in a blind panic. We could hear his big feet drumming against the ground and the crashing sounds as he slammed into trees and tore through brush, heedless of injury in his urgent quest to get anywhere else. As you can imagine, this did wonders for our confidence. We decided at once that we too should be elsewhere. Thus began our retreat, at a slower pace but with just as much desire to be out of those woods as Bozo had. There was something with us. We could hear it out there, keeping pace. We'd both brought flashlights to spot frogs, but the normally bright beams faded as soon as we turned them on, as if the batteries were already almost dead. We turned them off to save power, only switching them on when the accompanying footsteps, bipedal, got too close. Even with the weak light, we saw nothing in the gloom. I had a .22 pistol for snakes, and I gripped it with white knuckles. There was nothing to shoot. Twice as we walked, we heard the sound of someone running up behind us. We whirled around, switching on our lights, only to find empty darkness. My skin crawled constantly, and the hair on the back of my neck stood up. The feeling of being watched, of a malignant presence, was intense. The temptation to run blindly away as Bozo had done was always there, like a heartbeat. Once, something touched my shoulder, like a hand had been laid lightly on it, and I yelped. "Dang it," Larry said. "Something just pulled on my shirt." "We're going," I yelled into the darkness. "Leaving, just lay the heck off and we'll be gone." We stumbled on, knowing the road must be close by now. The pressure, the hatred, seemed to diminish with each step, and we began to see the glimmer of yard lights through the trees. We burst through the brush line and out into the open air of the roadway. Bozo came running to meet us, wagging his ridiculous tail like a whip. He'd waited for us there out in the open. He was worried about us, just not worried enough to stay out there in those haunted woods with us. I've always wondered what it was, what the dog saw. Almost tiger food. From J. Ion. My friend was born and raised in Bangladesh, specifically in the capital city of Dhaka. She left to study abroad when she finished high school, as did most of her extended family, with many of them choosing to settle permanently in the USA, UK, and UAE. Despite the separation, they remain in frequent contact with each other and made annual visits to their home country. In 2013, it just so happened that all the family members based abroad were visiting Dhaka at the same time, which never happened before. My friend's dad, who always played host to returning relatives, is somewhat of a leader of the clan. He decided that on this rare occasion of having the entire family back on home soil, they should all go on a holiday together to a local tourist attraction, specifically to the famous Sundarbans, a large national park that is home to the endangered Bengal tigers. He booked a resort village to accommodate 23 people for 5 days, within the vicinity of the Sundarban National Park, and had each day's itinerary planned with a local tour company. They all enjoyed the trip very much, especially because the peaceful and pristine forests of the Sundarbans proved to be a wonderful relief from the never-ending, overcrowded, polluted hustle and bustle of the capital city. On the 4th day, the more senior family members wanted to take another walk through the forest trails before they had to leave the following morning. By the time they made the request with the local tour company for forest rangers to guide them on this walk, it was around the late afternoon on a Thursday. Because Bangladesh is an Islamic country, Friday is recognized the first day of the weekend, due to it being considered a sacred day. So many people will be winding down from Thursday evening onwards. What this meant was, instead of having at least 2 armed rangers guide the group, as per the recommendation by safety experts, the tour company managed to secure just 1 armed ranger who was willing to guide the walk on such short notice. My friend and her entire family were completely unaware of this safety recommendation then, so they happily got ready for the walk. By the time they were halfway through the forest walk, the sun was starting to set. The ranger had walked at the very front of the group with the more senior family members, while the younger ones were trailing behind, all of them distracted by their chatting amongst each other, and not realizing the distance they were creating from the safety of the ranger's guns. My friend felt her stomach rumble, very softly at first. Thinking it was slight hunger pangs or her weak constitution randomly acting up, she ignored it and kept walking while chatting. Just a minute later, she felt the stomach rumblings getting stronger, and something like vibrations from under the lungs. A few seconds afterwards, she felt the vibrations spread to her neck and ears, an odd sensation which she had never experienced before. This was when she heard a very faint growl. like an angry animal snarling from within a closed crate. She looked around, but saw nothing unusual in the dim light of dusk. She asked her cousins if they heard something, to which they shook their heads and replied that they had not. But then they all heard it. A very distinct and guttural growl, almost like it was building itself into a roar. It came from somewhere in the undergrowth of the forest, causing the trees and forest floor to visibly tremble. They immediately sprinted as quickly as humanly possible towards the direction of the ranger. They'd been so slow in their walk, they didn't realize the ranger and the rest of the family were nearly 1 kilometer ahead of them. So the ranger and family couldn't hear nor see any of the commotion. The entire time that they were running for safety, my friend said she could hear the growls getting louder with each second. She was praying that they weren't being stalked, because no human could outrun a tiger, especially in the diminishing light of the evening, in the tiger's home turf no less. When they saw the ranger, they yelled at him to hold his gun up and aim behind them. The ranger looked confused and yelled back at them to stop fooling around. My friend's cousin screamed at the ranger, "There's a tiger following us! Shoot it! Now!" The ranger held his rifle up, aiming up at the sky, and fired a warning shot. Everyone quickly huddled behind the ranger, including my friend and her cousins, who sprinted right behind their elders. With his gaze still on the forest, he yelled at everyone to get to the end of the trail and get out of the forest. The ranger walked backwards slowly, rifle pointing at the forest until he got to a safe spot with everyone else. Once all of them were in the safety of a shelter, they told the ranger what happened. The ranger was stunned. This is when they learned that the tiger was in fact crouching only 10 meters from where they were standing, based on the strength of the growl and the vibrations. My friend, who had felt her body rumbling, actually was experiencing very low-frequency growls that are used as a sort of warning by tigers. The most surprising part of their encounter was this: any tiger within 10 meters of prey or predator would have pounced. At that short of a distance, a tiger would have chosen to eliminate a threat directly, then leave things to chance. They were miraculously fortunate to have encountered a rather patient tiger who didn't feel like leaving its hiding spot at that time. Needless to say, they were very relieved to leave the next morning. They breathed a collective sigh of relief when they were within sight of the city. As much as they enjoyed the majority of their family holiday, they were too shaken up by this close encounter. Funnily enough, just a few weeks before this family trip, the Life of Pi novel by Jan Martel was made into a movie. I joked that she could have befriended Richard Parker, but unfortunately she is not Pi in the open sea. She didn't find my joke amusing. The Stalker That Wouldn't Leave. From Miss 11. A few years ago in the south of England, I decided to go for a walk in one of the local forests with my friend Jay and his dog, who was a black cocker spaniel. These walks soon became a regular occurrence. We followed the main paths for about 45 minutes before deciding to venture deeper into the woodland. As we entered the area with tall, thin trees, an eerie feeling crept over us, as if we were being watched. A few minutes after, we came upon a fence topped with barbed wire, with a field on the other side and more woods continuing beyond it. We stopped at the fence, and Jay's dog froze, staring at something across the field. A couple of seconds after noticing the dog's strange behavior, we heard a laugh drifting on the wind. This wasn't a normal laugh. It was a wicked, eerie cackle. Jay and I turned to face each other in sync, both wearing the same confused expression. There was no one else around. We were deep in the forest, far from any other people. We looked back across the field and spotted a tall figure, about 6'8", with red hair, yellow overalls, and a pale face, staring right back at us. Jay's dog hadn't moved, still fixated on whatever it was. Without saying a word, Jay and I both reacted the same way. We took off running, with the dog following close behind. We ran for about 5 to 10 minutes, not stopping for anything, until we were finally out of breath. We slowed down just off the main path to catch our breaths and process what had just happened. As we sat there trying to calm down, we began to hear a rustling in the bushes, and that same eerie laugh again. Without hesitation, we decided to head back to our cars and just leave. A couple of weeks later, we went on another walk with Jay's dog, but this time we chose a different location, about 8 or 9 kilometers away from the last forest. It was a cold winter morning, and we met up around 7:45 a.m., bundled up in gloves, hats, and winter coats. This time we stuck to the main paths for the entire walk. We had completed about a third of the route when that uneasy feeling returned, like we were being followed. Both Jay and I caught flashes of red and yellow in the corners of our eyes, but we dismissed it as our minds playing tricks on us. That was until we were about 5 minutes away from the car park. We heard that eerie cackle again from our previous walk, and I thought I saw a white face peeking out from the trees. Ever since these two encounters, Jay and I have felt like we are constantly being watched or followed whenever we're out in the wilderness, no matter where we are. One night I went over to Jay's house for dinner, and I ended up staying the night. While helping him clean up after dinner, we saw a tall, shadowy figure in his backyard. The figure was human-shaped, but quite tall, and there were no neighboring yards close enough for it to have been anyone else. We immediately thought of that same thing we had seen before. We've tried researching local folklore or other sightings, but we haven't found anything. This remains an unsolved mystery. I've since moved away, but Jay still claims to have seen this figure and continues to feel watched. Whenever I return to visit, I get that same feeling too. I hope to God, whatever this creature is, it doesn't harm my friend or his dog whenever I'm not there. My first and hopefully last Wendigo encounter. From James 54:2. I'm 28 years old and living in Texas. This is my story. Back in 2019, there was a lot of talk about unknown creatures roaming the forests. Things like Bigfoot and even skinwalkers. But this story isn't about them. This tale is about probably one of the scariest things I've ever heard of. The Wendigo. A few months after one of my friends named Jacob mentioned the uproar, I went to see him. I'd been away, enlisted in the United States Marines, and I'd just been discharged. One of the first things I did was go to visit him. We were having a great time when he brought up the idea of going out to a little hangout spot his ex-girlfriend had taken him to when they wanted to get away for a few hours. I figured why not, so I grabbed my gun and we headed out to this extremely secluded area, where there was an old dock. The place looked abandoned, poorly maintained, with some boards nearly rotted through. About half an hour into our shenanigans, Jacob brought up the topic of the Wendigo. The name itself gave me a chill, even being a Marine. Curious, I asked him about it. He told me that if you went into the woods and said Wendigo 3 times, you would come across the scariest thing you'd ever see. Thinking he was bluffing, I told him to prove it. To this day, I wish I hadn't. We started to walk down a narrow path that led deep into the thick woods near the Alabama state line. We walked for maybe 20 minutes and decided we were finally in a good spot. It's worth noting that it had been raining heavily the past few days, so the ground was completely saturated. Jacob dared me to say it. I stood there in complete silence. The rest of the forest was eerily quiet, save for the tall pines swaying in the wind above our heads. Reluctantly, I started to say it. Wendigo. 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 Then, nothing happened. I let out a sigh of relief. In the 10 years Jacob and I had been friends, this was one of the few times I had proven him wrong. We started laughing and talking trash to each other when we suddenly heard a noise in the distance. Reflexes kicking in, I immediately snapped towards the sound, which was soon joined by others. I moved closer, and moments later, we saw a few coyotes running across the path about 30 feet in front of us. Another sigh of relief, but that relief didn't last long. I had a gut feeling that something was off. As we turned to leave the woods, a tall pine tree began to groan and creak as it fell down. Acting on pure instinct, I shoved Jacob forward, just as the tree came crashing down between us. Jacob screamed as the tree hit the ground, and I quickly jumped over it to get back to him. I could feel his heart pounding like a drum as I pulled him up to his feet. Still freaked out, he wasn't moving fast enough. I yelled at him. "Move, Jacob! Move now!" I spun him around, causing him to stumble and fall. I helped him back up, and we both started to sprint down the path, back the way we'd came. Neither of us dared to look back. As we ran, I suddenly heard a familiar voice behind me. "Jacob! Jacob, come quick!" It was the voice of Jacob's younger sister, Olivia. Jacob immediately tried to run past me, screaming, "Olivia!" I grabbed him. "Jacob, look at me. That is not her, do you hear me? That can't be her." Just then, another pine tree began to buckle. I tackled Jacob to the ground, and we narrowly avoided being crushed. I screamed at him again, "Go, get out of here, now!" As I shouted, I pulled a gun from my waistband and aimed it down the trail in the direction we'd come from. Jacob made it to the trailhead, turned back, and saw me still aiming my gun. "Bradley, get out of there! Hurry!" I turned and ran towards him. As I reached the clearing, about 50 feet ahead, Jacob and I both saw it. The thing we had dared to summon. A Wendigo. It stood around 9 feet tall on 2 legs, with barely any meat on its bones. Its legs were unnaturally skinny, and its arms were even skinnier. Its skin was pale white, almost like that of a vampire. But what stood out the most were its eyes, a vibrant blue, almost like lightsaber blue, for those who have seen Star Wars. Overcome with fear, I raised my gun and fired at it. Jacob, not sticking around to see if I'd killed it, turned and ran for the car, and I followed close behind. That was my first experience with the so-called Wendigo, and I pray every night that I never encounter anything that terrifying again. In the Trees, from Gallon 24. I've always hated the walk back from my friend's house. It's about 1.5 miles of dark, empty road, with only 2 distant street lamps lighting the way. On either side, dense trees and thick forest loom like a wall of shadows. Every time I make that walk, I get this feeling in the pit of my stomach that something is watching me. I know it sounds stupid and cliché, but I simply can't shake it. My friends always offer to drive me home, but I usually decline. I guess I'm just stubborn like that. Anyway, this particular night, it was around 1 a.m. when I finally decided to head on home. We'd been playing video games and lost track of time. You know how it goes. I said my goodbyes and started the walk home. It was cold as heck that night, and everything was just still. The kind of quiet where you can hear your own heartbeat. Every step I took, the crunch of my boots on the gravel road seemed to echo way louder than normal. The street lamps were so far apart, casting these long stretches of darkness between them. I could feel my heart starting to race, even though I'd walked this road dozens of times before. It just felt different that night. I don't know how else to explain it. I was about halfway through the walk when I started to hear it. At first, it was so quiet, I thought I was imagining things. But the more I listened, the clearer it was. It was a soft, low noise, almost like a whisper or hiss. You know how sometimes the wind through the trees can sound like voices? That's what I thought it was at first. But the more I listened, the more it sounded like, I'm not sure, like someone was trying to get my attention. I stopped walking and turned around, trying to see if I could spot anything in the tree line, but it was far too dark that night. My eyes couldn't make out much past the faint glow from the street lamp up ahead. I told myself I was just being paranoid, that it was all in my head, so I kept on walking, picking up the pace a little. Soon I heard it again, this time closer, way closer. It sounded like a low, raspy voice calling my name, or at least it was trying to. I felt my chest tighten up, and I had to force myself not to stop walking. I didn't want to look again. I just wanted to get home. But then, I don't know why, but something made me look up. Something in the trees caught my eye, and that's when I saw him. Clinging to the top branches of this old, tall pine tree, maybe 50 feet up in the air, was a man. He was pale and skinny, almost skeletal. His skin had this grayish tint to it under the weak moonlight, and the way he was hanging there in the tree, it was like he was trying to hide, or maybe he was trying to scare me, not sure which is worse. But I could definitely see his eyes. They were wide open and unblinking and locked right onto me. I'd never felt so unsafe before. I froze for a moment. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. I was so sure I was hallucinating. But then I saw him move. It was slow at first, really deliberate. He shifted his weight, and I could see his fingers gripping the branch as he lowered his body slightly. It hit me then. This man was preparing to jump. I still couldn't move. I had to see what was about to happen. In one quick motion, I watched this man jump from the tree. The sound he made when he hit the ground, I'll never forget. It was this heavy thud, way louder than you'd expect from someone who looked so frail. That sound was what finally snapped me out of my stupor. I ran so fast, legs pumping like pistons, and I didn't stop to look back even once. The road felt like it went on forever, but I kept on going. My breath was ragged, and for a while there, all I could hear in my ears was my own heartbeat. I just wanted to get home, get to safety. By the time I reached my front door, I was gasping for air. I slammed the door behind me so hard, my parents came running. They were startled, demanding to know what was going on. I tried to explain what I'd seen, but the words weren't coming out right. My parents could see how freaked out I was. They called the police right away. The 2 officers showed up pretty quick, and I was able to lead them back to the exact spot where I'd seen the man fall. The whole way there, I could still hear the sound of that thud in my mind, still feel his eyes on me. But when we got there was nothing. No sign of anyone. No footprints, no broken branches, no trace of the man I'd seen. The cops went ahead, searching the area thoroughly, but they found nothing out of place. They tried to reassure me, telling me what I was originally hoping it was, just my imagination, that I'd possibly mistaken a wild animal for a person in the dark. But I knew what I saw. They weren't about to convince me otherwise. Back at the house, my parents made me apologize. I did, and went to bed, partially embarrassed but mostly terrified. The next few weeks were rough. I felt creeped out on that road, and I stopped walking along it. If I had to go to my friends, they would either have to pick me up, or my parents would have to drop me off. Middle of the night, broad daylight, it doesn't matter. It's a pretty crazy story, and I've mostly gotten over it. But to this day, when I think about it, I get a chill down my spine. Who or what was that? I've always wondered if I watched an insane man kill himself in front of me, dying only after he dragged himself far enough away in the woods where the police wouldn't find him. Did it follow me? From Charlie Hall 765. Let me start by saying, my family has always had a knack for sensing spirits and other entities, especially my mother. She realized she had this ability when she was about 15, but that's a story for another time. This story begins back in the 90s when I was 11 years old. My mother, my older brother who was 13 at the time, and I lived way out in the boonies on a 5-acre plot of land in central Indiana. Our house sat about 50 yards back from the road, and behind it was a 2-story garage, a pond with a shed, and further back was an old wooden shack, with a patch of woods behind that to round out our property. When we first moved in, my mother told us to stay out of that shack. She said we'd been using it for excess trash or anything too big to put out by the road, and that raccoons and other animals would likely hang about there. So we didn't mess with it. We had plenty of land to roam and explore without needing to go near that shack. A little time passed after we moved in, and we started to experience typical ghostly encounters. Footsteps, gusts of wind where there shouldn't be, things like that. My mother told us not to worry, explaining that she believed it was just the ghost of a little girl who had drowned in that pond years back. She even gave her a name, Libby. Libby would do things that a typical little girl might do. Poke us, run around the corner and hide. It was all very playful, though it sometimes scared me because I was so young. But my mother always reassured me that everything was fine and that Libby was harmless. I only had one encounter where I actually saw Libby, and to this day that memory is burned into my head. It was about a year after we moved in. My cousin, Tyler, was over, and we were in the game room, playing GameCube. The game room had a big glass window that looked out onto the backyard and the pond. As we played, I happened to glance out the window, and I saw what looked like a little girl, maybe around 5 years of age. She was standing under the pond light with her back to the house, just staring out at the water. She had jet black hair and was wearing a white dress with red polka dots and a little red bow in her hair. By this point, I'd experienced enough to know that if I looked away, there was a good chance she would disappear. So without taking my eyes off of her, I paused the game and told Tyler to get up and look. Now, Tyler didn't know anything about Libby, so when he saw the girl, he started to freak out, asking who she was and why she was out there in the middle of the night, where her parents were, and so on. All very reasonable questions. As he asked, the little girl slowly began to turn around to look at the house, and just as I was about to see her face, boom, she disappeared. That was enough for us that night. We turned off the game, lay down, and put on a funny movie to help us fall asleep. Fast forward about a year. We had grown so used to Libby that she didn't bother us anymore. One summer day, while my mom was at work, Tyler and I were outside fishing and catching garter snakes, just being adventurous. We decided that after living there so long without ever checking out the old shack, it was finally time for us to take a look. So we made the short hike back to the shack and went inside. There was some trash, but not as much as we expected. What we did find was an old wooden bed frame, a wooden dresser, and a little wooden baby crib that neither of us had ever seen before. They looked very old, almost handmade. Being the rambunctious teenage boys we were, we started to throw stuff around, breaking things and tearing it up. After we had our fun, we went back inside to get some drinks. When my mother came home from work, she barged through the front door, already yelling at us. She asked why we had been messing around in the shack and what we had done. At the time, we couldn't understand how she knew, since it had been hours ago, and she was in a different town. But she did know, and she was furious. We apologized and offered to clean it up, but she told us to leave it alone and stay in the house. After that day, we never heard or felt Libby again. I started to become really depressed and had trouble controlling my emotions. At first, I thought it was just puberty. But after a week or two, I began to feel like I was being watched, and not in a protective kind of way. Every day, the feeling got worse. One night, I was lying in bed, watching TV, about to fall asleep, when I got that feeling again, like I wasn't alone. I looked over at the sliding closet door in my room. The door was broken and wouldn't close all the way, and as I looked, I saw a pair of red eyes. Not glowing, but dark, barely visible red eyes, just staring at me. There was no figure, no body, just eyes. It terrified me to the point that I started sleeping in the living room and refused to go into my bedroom. About 6 months later, we moved out of that house. It took my mother years to finally tell me what had happened and how she knew about the shack. She told me that from the very first day we moved in, she had sensed something evil connected to that shack. That's why she warned us to stay away. And when I'd gone out, destroying the bed frame and crib, whatever evil was in there moved into my bedroom. We moved because she was afraid of what was happening to me because of it. Looking back, I realize what happened. Now I'm telling this story because ever since we lived in that house, I've developed my own ability to sense these things. Every house I've lived in since has had continuous, unexplained paranormal activity. Even the house I live in now, 20 years later, as a grown man with children of my own. Every apartment, every house, every building I've lived in has had these issues. It makes me wonder, has whatever I angered as a child been following me all these years, tormenting me at every stop? Was there ever really a Libby, or was it that thing posing as an innocent child to infiltrate our family and feed off our energy? I guess it's up to me to find out. Footsteps in the dark. From Tiny Goose. For context, it was my first trip to Scotland. My boyfriend and I decided to spend Christmas in New York, then fly across the pond to spend New Year's Eve in London. Since he has a bit of an obsession with Scotland, he insisted we spend a couple of days in Edinburgh and Glasgow. Word of advice: leave a little wiggle room in your plans. Due to a lack of planning, or maybe a few things going wrong, we ended up with no place to stay for a night in Edinburgh. We didn't think this would be a problem because we figured we could sleep at the bus station. as we were supposed to catch a bus to Glasgow first thing in the morning. After a couple of drinks and a friendly couple offering us a place to crash, which we politely declined, not wanting to impose, we headed to the bus station. We were hauling 2 very big and very heavy suitcases. When we got to the station, we stashed our bags in the pay-to-use lockers and sat down, waiting for the night to pass. To give you more context, we're from Argentina, where most public spaces stay open all night long, so it came as quite a shock when we were told we couldn't spend the night at the station, even though our bus was scheduled for 6:30 a.m. So yeah, next tip, do some contingency research. Next thing we knew, we were out on the streets of Edinburgh in the middle of January. After Googling a few hotels that might accommodate us and finding no luck, there was some sort of sporting event and all the hotels were booked, we ended up wandering the streets of the city, which I do highly recommend if you have a place to stay afterward. We found ourselves on a very quiet, almost eerie road on the side of Calton Hill. There was a row of fancy houses uphill, interrupted by a path leading further into a dark, secluded forest area. Our reason for being there: a small, reasonably priced hotel at the end of the road. We wanted to check to see if they had any vacancy. When we reached the hotel, we were greeted by a tiny maisonette, illuminated only by 2 old-fashioned lamps. We rang the bell and nothing happened. The sound of the bell interrupted the quiet, making us acutely aware of how lonely and isolated we were. We rang a second time, and we were about to ring a third when a withered, pale face appeared behind the window pane, staring back at us with a startled expression. The lady, who must have been around 80 years old, was wearing an old-fashioned pink gown. "Is this a hotel?" we asked. "Yes," she replied, surprised and almost offended by the question. Do you have any vacancies?" "No," she said, as if clutching her pearls, before promptly closing the small window and disappearing upstairs. And just like that, our hopes of sleeping indoors vanished. We headed back down the street, defeated. Let me set the scene. We were walking down this empty, eerie street illuminated only by moonlight. To our left, the row of houses stretched toward Calton Hill. To our right, the road sloped downwards into an abyss of darkness. When we reached the end of the street, a small path crossed in front of us, leading to an almost medieval-looking church that gave me the heebie-jeebies. My imagination ran wild. Don't all old churches have creepy burial grounds around them? I was snapped out of my thoughts when my boyfriend, the wildlife enthusiast, thought that he saw a fox running across the road, heading up Calton Hill. Naturally, he did what any sane person would do. He ran after it to get a better look. We have foxes in Argentina, so he really didn't need to be doing this. But there he went, and of course, I followed. I admit I did want to see the fox too. The fox disappeared into a fenced-off, heavily wooded area, and we were left standing at the base of the dark and beautiful monstrosity that is Calton Hill at 3 a.m. The sight was breathtaking, and we even considered going up the hill to cross the town. Then we realized something strange. The wind had died down. No leaves rustling, no animals burrowing, no owls hooting, and certainly no fox. The silence was deafening, and the stillness made our skin crawl. How could it be this quiet? We were only a few hundred meters from the main road. For a split second, my heart skipped a beat, and the most horrendous thought crossed my mind. What if we were led here? I quickly brushed the thought aside, but the idea lingered. We were sitting ducks. We could easily be hunted, and no one would hear us scream. Another thought crossed my mind. My mom waving goodbye at the airport, saying, "Please be safe, please don't do anything stupid." Oh God, what would she think if they found my body out here? I turned to my boyfriend and asked, "Honey, are there Wendigos in Scotland?" He looked at me, confused by the sudden question. "No, those are in North America, if they even exist." He paused. "But I think they have kelpies." "What are those?" I asked. "They're said to be water horses that can shapeshift into human form to seduce you and lure you into bodies of water. Then they drown you and take you away. But I would hazard a guess we're safe here. There's no water around," he joked. The joke didn't comfort me at all. My train of thought was interrupted by the only sound we'd heard for a while. A deep, loud noise in the quiet night. No, not just the night. It came from the exact spot where the last slivers of moonlight met the dark tree line, less than 2 meters away from us. Rhythmic thuds, loud, heavy thuds, 3 of them, as if made by human footsteps wearing heavy metal-clad shoes. But the most terrifying part wasn't the sound. It was that the noise stopped. Someone or something was lurking in the dark just meters away from us, listening and watching, knowing we were alone and vulnerable. Whoever or whatever it was had waited until we were close, took 3 steps, and didn't move again. For a few seconds, we froze. This was the kind of situation my mother had warned me about. My boyfriend looked at me with terror in his eyes and whispered, "Let's get out of here now." We ran. We ran like heck, all the way to Waverly Bridge, where we finally found a foul-smelling hostel to crash in. To this day, I still think about that night. What was it? Was it the fox shape-shifting into something larger and more menacing? Was it a drunk man trying to scare us, or maybe even hurt us? We may never know. But let me tell you this. Plan your trips in advance. And when your gut tells you to run, you'd better listen. The Thing in My Grandparents' Cottage. From Marvin Martin. This event took place in one of the villages up north on the Egyptian north coast, which, if you don't know, is a very popular summer destination. I was 16 when this happened. Every summer break since I was 5 years old, I would spend 3 months at my grandparents' house. So I was practically raised there, and it felt like home. The layout of the cottage was simple. You walked in, and to the left was the living room, with a wide window backed by shutters overlooking the street. In front of you was the dining room table, and to the right was a hallway with 3 bedrooms. My grandparents' room was first, followed by a second big bedroom, and at the end was my small single bedroom. Finally, at the very end of the hallway, was the kitchen and back door. I had just finished the school semester, and like a typical teenager going through a rebellious phase, I wasn't thrilled about spending the summer with my grandparents. But tradition always won out, so I had to go. That didn't mean I wasn't going to stay out late with the friends I'd made over the years. My grandparents were strict about curfews, and I had to be back by 11 p.m., which I did. By that time, though, they were already asleep. That night, I came back and grabbed a snack from the fridge. I sat in the living room with the TV on mute, and after a while, I began to feel really sleepy. Knowing they would wake me up at 6 a.m. anyway, I decided it was time for bed, especially since I actually enjoyed my grandpa's breakfasts. I fell asleep in my humid bedroom without a second thought, but suddenly, around 4 a.m., I woke up, drenched in sweat and feeling incredibly thirsty. Since my room was right next to the kitchen, I figured I'd grab some cold water to cool off and help me go back to sleep. I quietly opened the fridge in the dark, trying not to wake up anyone. As I took a big gulp, I turned around, closing the bottle. That's when I froze. Right in front of me, only inches from my face, was a large black mass. I stood still, my heart racing, every hair on my body stood on end, and I couldn't move. For a moment I thought I'd gone blind, because this thing was close to my face. But I could still see through it. I could make out the streetlights through the shutters in the living room window. I tried to scream, but it was as if I was on mute. Panic surged through me, but I remained paralyzed. The thing didn't say a word or make a move. Suddenly I dropped the bottle, and just like that, its hold on me loosened. I bolted into my room, sat on my bed, and stared at the doorway where the thing had been. It didn't follow me, didn't cross the threshold. I stayed like that until somehow I fell asleep and woke up at 10 a.m. To my surprise, my grandparents had slept in, and I actually had to wake them up, which worried me a bit. On my way to their room, I saw the bottle still on the floor, proving to me this wasn't just a nightmare. Later in the afternoon, I called my dad and insisted that he find a way to bring me back to the city. I couldn't stay at this cottage anymore. I left that day at around 6 p.m. and never told anyone what happened. I kept it to myself. That figure still haunts my nightmares. In those dreams, it stands inches from my face, paralyzing me, leaving me waking up in a cold sweat and gasping for air. Right before Christmas that same year, my grandpa went out to the cottage by himself, as he always did, to seal the place off for winter. He wanted to make sure nothing was damaged while the home was abandoned until next summer. But my grandpa never came back. They found him lying in the exact spot where I'd encountered that shadow. Ever since then, no one else has set foot inside that cottage. This was 18 years ago. I've spent a lot of time investigating what happened. I've asked many of the Bedouin natives in the area about these kinds of entities, but no one seems to have a clue what it was. They say some cottages out there were built where they weren't supposed to be, but beyond that, there are no answers. Why the deer? From Please Stay. This story happened when I was 6 years old. I lived in a small town in southern Mississippi, and at the time, we lived on 246 acres of forest. In Mississippi, deer season is a big deal, and hunting is quite popular. That year, my dad was hunting from a tree stand at the edge of our property. As usual, being the curious one, I was up in the tree stand with him, reading some book about animals. Suddenly, a gunshot rang out. I looked up at my dad. He smiled and said, "I just got a buck." Evidently, a deer had walked out, and I didn't see it because I was too engrossed in my book. A few minutes later, we climbed down from the stand and found blood in the grass, leading towards the trees. As it was getting dark, we decided to go back home to grab flashlights before heading back into the woods to track the deer. As we walked, we came to a thick patch of woods and had to army crawl under some branches. My dad decided to go one way, and I went the other. I was about 50 yards away from him when I found a piece of a shoulder bone covered in blood at the base of a tree. I thought this was strange, as deer don't usually lose bones when you shoot them. While I was examining this bone, I suddenly heard the snap of a twig. I searched with my flashlight in the direction of the sound. What I saw will forever be burned into my memory. Standing there was an 11-foot tall, gray, human-shaped thing. It was dragging the lifeless body of the deer behind it. The creature didn't seem to notice me, and I didn't get a good look at its head, but I was terrified. I closed my eyes and began to cry. When I opened them, that thing was gone, leaving only a trail of blood leading deeper into the forest. About an hour later, my dad found me, still crying at the base of a tree. We never found that deer. That night, my dad took me home. I was silent the whole way, clinging to him on the four-wheeler, scared that whatever I had seen might come back for us. After doing some of my own research, I still have no idea what it was. But I believe it killed the deer, not the bullet. Since then, I've continued to hunt and fish, but I've developed a healthy respect for the woods, knowing that some things are better left alone. The creature I saw resembled a cryptid known as the country road creature, but I'm not entirely sure. If you have any ideas about what this might have been, I'd love to hear them. I plan to share more stories in the future about my encounters with cryptids. I went back to that spot a few days ago, hoping to re-spark some old memories. I found some weird claw marks in the tree, so maybe whatever I saw that night is still out there. But I don't plan on finding out if it still roams those woods. Ever since that night, fewer and fewer deer have been coming by our house. I'm not sure if it's connected, but I have a feeling it might be. I'll keep you updated if anything else happens. Skinwalker Encounters from Boomhauer 22. To start this story, it involves multiple encounters. The first one happened when I was about 15 or 16 years old. I was with my cousin. We'll call him L for the story. It took place at my mom's house, out in the middle of nowhere, Illinois. We did have a few neighbors, along with my grandma and grandpa living next door, but they were about 300 yards away. One night at the beginning of winter, Elle was staying over with me. After a fun and tiring day, around midnight, we decided to go outside for a walk. We stepped out the door and sat down on the porch for a minute to put our shoes on. Once we got them on, we started walking down the driveway. We had taken about 10 steps when Elle and I both looked towards my grandparents' house, seeing a figure run underneath the only streetlight. At first, we thought it was my grandma's dog, as that's what it looked like. But when it reached the road, it stood up on 2 legs and ran into the cornfield across the road. We turned to each other, and I was the first to speak. "Did you see that? What the heck was it? I thought it was my grandma's dog, but it looked like it was standing on 2 legs." "That's what I thought too," Elle replied. Realizing that whatever we had seen was not anything we could explain, we both bolted back into the house, nearly crashing into the door at the same time. Once inside, we locked every window and door in the house. There were a lot of windows, and then hid in my room for the rest of the night, with no further trouble. The next encounter happened a few years later, with my other cousin we'll call D. It was during deer season. D and I were hunting together as we usually did every year. We were sitting quietly, talking about who knows what, when a few deer came up. A couple of does and some small bucks, nothing big enough to shoot. While we watched them, suddenly a tall, skinny, rotting-looking figure appeared. It jumped onto one of the small bucks and took it down in moments, tearing it apart. We watched disturbed as the creature picked up the remains and carried them off. As it left, it made the most terrifying scream we'd ever heard. Once it was out of sight, D was the first to speak. "Was that what I think it was?" "Yes," I replied. "Yes, it was." At that time, we both knew about skinwalkers, but didn't fully believe in them. But after that day, we were quickly believers. The next story involves D again, and another cousin named L. Not the same L from the first story, though. This encounter took place in the woods around where we all lived. We set off to go coon hunting one night, leaving around 9:30 p.m. We arrived in the woods around 9:40. We brought 2 dogs with us and let them loose. After that, we stood around talking and playing on our phones. Suddenly, the dogs started to go haywire, which was unusual for them. Dee, Elle, and I grabbed our flashlights and set off into the woods. I had my .22, and Dee had his own. For those who don't know, the .22 is the best weapon for shooting raccoons out of trees. At that moment, I wished one of us had brought a bigger gun. As we ventured deeper into the woods, we started to hear a moaning sound, like someone being attacked. We all exchanged nervous glances. We knew no one else was supposed to be out here. Realizing we weren't alone, we sprinted towards the dogs, trying to figure out what was going on. As we got closer, we heard a long, high-pitched scream that stopped us all in our tracks. Elle eventually said, "That didn't sound human. What was it?" Dee and I looked at each other and replied, "Skinwalker," as the 2 of us had both heard the same scream a few years prior. Since the dogs belonged to Dee, he wanted to go after them, to try to save them if he could. Elle and I refused to let him go alone, so we all headed in together, lights on and guns ready. When we got to the clearing, we saw a tall, skinny, ragged, pale creature swiping at the dogs. The dogs managed to dodge each swipe, just in the nick of time. Dee and I aimed and started to shoot. My .22 was automatic, and Dee's was a single-shot rifle. I fired more shots, but my automatic only held 10 bullets, and I was quickly out of ammo. As soon as I ran out, the thing turned towards us. I swear we heard it say, "You all better run." Those words were all it took. We turned and ran at record speed through the woods. At some point, Dee tripped, and Elle and I stopped to help him up. The moment we turned around, we saw the figure of that thing running towards us, faster than we thought was possible. It moved in this weird, glitchy way, like a video game character lagging around. We booked it out of that forest, barely making it out alive. Somehow the dogs were right behind us. Once we were out in the clearing, we turned around and saw the tall creature standing at the edge of the woods, staring at us. We stood there, frozen, for what felt like several minutes. Then it turned and let out the same blood-curdling scream we'd heard earlier. We wasted no time loading the dogs into the truck and speeding away. None of us said a word the entire ride home. We were too out of breath, too shaken up. Our minds raced, trying to grasp how we all made it out alive, and how the dogs had too. None of us even had a scratch, but we all knew that we shouldn't have made it out. Thanks for stopping by our little campsite here at Outdoor Terrors. To hear your story on the show, send it to us at darkstories.org. For more scary stories from me, catch me on my other podcasts, Unexplained Encounters and Tales from the Break Room, on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or your favorite podcast app. Or go to eeriecast.com for those and even more terrifying podcasts. Follow me on X or Twitter at Dark Prevails, and if you don't mind, leave a rating for Outdoor Terrors on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Till next time, I'll see you soon when the campfire blazes once again.